What made you laugh the hardest in your entire life? Back in the mid-90s, when I was a 15-something teenager, my cousins and I had the house to ourselves, so one decides to put a porno in the VCR. I warned him that my dad was coming home soon and that he might want to think twice, but he didn't heed my warning. We kept watching the front door, so we'd be ready to eject the tape and not get caught. Lo and behold, my dad just happened to come through the side door in the garage that day and was suddenly standing there behind us. Myself and one of my cousins bolted out of the room when we noticed him. The third cousin wasn't so lucky. He noticed us running off and, with my dad right behind him, shouted after us, "Hey, where you guys going? Don't ya want to jerk your dicks?" At that point I lost all feelings in my legs as I fell to the floor in laughter. I could still see my cousin through the hallway as he was slowly turning around and noticing my dad behind him, at which point he jumped back around, frantically trying to figure out how to turn off the VCR, but to no avail. It was one of those really old VCRs where stop and eject weren't on the front of the unit. He finally just dropped to his knees and tried hugging the TV to block the picture, crying that he was sorry. I turned so red from laughter that it felt like I was running a fever. I had difficulty breathing for the rest of the day and my ribs felt like they'd been shattered. My poor cousin though, he not only got caught watching porn in hilarious fashion, but he also got teased for years about whether or not he was serious about his proposal to jerk our dicks in the same room together. Edit. My first gold and silver. Thank you, kind strangers. Also my highest rated comment. I'm so glad I brought everyone a good laugh this day, especially those thinking my dad was the one who made the jerking our dicks comment, which would have been extra hilarious and extremely out of character for him. I'm sorry I can't keep up with the responses, but your laughs have put a big smile on my face today. I'm off to bed now. To sleep. Yeah, sleep dusts off VCR. I was in college. I shared a dorm with my buddy Matt. My girlfriend, my first real love, had done something faked up and decided we weren't together. I was utterly heartbroken. I cried for days. I have a history of serious depression, suicidal tendencies, and it just sent me into a spiral. I remember laying in my bed with my arm over my face so that Matt wouldn't know tears were streaming down my face. He mentioned that an old friend of his from Round Rock, Texas would be coming to stay in our dorm for the weekend. I didn't give a shit, and I didn't even really remember until the guy showed up. He came in the door, Matt introduced him as Chet, and I stayed in bed with my arm over my face. Matt and Chet were catching up, talking about old times, when Chet asked what was my problem. Matt explained the breakup and the depression. Chet proceeded to walk over to my bed and pull the covers off me. He pulled my arm off of my face and said, "Not while I'm here, not on my watch." I couldn't stop crying. He dragged me out of bed and sat me down next to Matt. We just talked. He started telling jokes. I wish to God I could remember what he said. Within 30 minutes I had, for the first time in my life, fallen out of my chair laughing. I laughed so hard I cried. He was that funny. The entire weekend he had me laughing. I loved him for it. It was like meeting a brother or an angel or something. When he left I hugged him so many times and told him I loved him. We kept in touch a little bit over Facebook, just once in a while. One day I checked his Facebook at random. All of the posts said RIP, or I miss you so much. I couldn't figure out what was going on. It literally made no sense. I texted his aunt and said, "What the fuck is this stuff?" She said, "I'm so sorry, baby. Chet has hung himself." His ashes were spread in Garner State Park, outside of Round Rock. It was his favorite place. I was at my mother's house when I got the message. She hadn't seen me cry since I was 10 years old. I tried so hard to swallow it down. I broke down. It has been about 6 years, and I still think of him and break down. But I will never forget the day he got me out of bed and said, "Not on my watch." I may ask Matt, my old dorm buddy, just what it was Chet said to me to make me fall out of that chair. I will never forget Chester Hadel. I love you, Chet. Edit. Well, this got buried. At least I got it off my chest. Edit 2. I haven't checked my account in some time and had no idea this blew up or was even seen. Thank you for the kind words. I will try to think of a better update soon. Final edit. I asked Matt what it was that Chet said to make me laugh. He said it was nothing, and it was everything. He couldn't open his mouth without being that goddamn funny a Bitchery. This school near my house had closed down, so me and my 4 brothers went there pretty frequently one summer and essentially made it our personal playground. One day we were there playing basketball, riding our skateboards and whatnot when a cop drives past the school and sees us messing around in there. Obviously we weren't supposed to be there, and we got spooked, so we bailed and went to hop the fence and run home. All my brothers can manage the fence well, and we are throwing our bikes over and trying to get the hell out of there before the cop turns the corner. He probably would have just told us to go home, but we were young and worried. As I turn to grab one of the bikes, I look over at my youngest brother, who was probably around 6 or 7 at the time, got himself caught on the fence as he was coming down. He managed to give himself the most ultimate wedgie I've ever seen. He wasn't holding himself up on anything, but he was suspended up in the air hanging by his underwear. All of us just stopped trying to rush home and started howling with laughter to the point where we could hardly help my screaming brother down from his wedgie. I still remember seeing his cheeks hanging out from his wedgie as he was crying, begging for help. Probably my favorite childhood memory. Edit. I told my brother, who got the wedgie, to guess what I wrote as the story. That made me laugh the hardest, and he guessed it on his first try. Haha, thanks for telling me all your wedgie escapades as well. It's still this story, and I hope it makes you laugh too. We could all use more of that. My son was 4. I told him to get dressed one morning. He ran away to his room, comes back like a half hour later, and he's wearing about 20 t-shirts all on top of each other, so his upper body looks huge, and then has a pair of shorts on. I tried not to laugh. Then he says, "Daddy, I put on my clothes and I have underwear on." And he had this sly grin. Obviously, he didn't have any on, and I don't know what the top part was about, so I said, "And how many shirts do you have on, buddy?" "Just one." So we played for a while, and finally he said he needed to go to the washroom. He walks out of the room. So I walk into the hallway, and it turns out he didn't close the door. He's got his pants around his ankles and he's peeing, standing up, which surprised me, but I noticed no underwear too. Plus his upper body looked huge. He was pretty funny to see. So I said, "Dude, you gotta close the door, especially since I saw you were lying about wearing underwear." He said, "No daddy, I'm wearing underwear, you just can't see them." So I said, "Sure you are," and closed the door for him. He comes back into the living room and proceeds to take off layer after layer of shirt, piling them on the floor. I was pretty much not sure what the hell he was up to, but he seemed to be having fun. Anyways, he puts like 20 or 25 shirts down and finally pulls off the second last one, and a faking pair of underwear fall out and on the floor, and he points at them and says, "See daddy, I was wearing underwear." I was dumbfounded. He still lied about having only one shirt on though. I nearly lost my mind laughing at my buddy's bachelor party late at night, sitting at a table after much drinking. One of his friends, who is a lawyer, shared a theory that he'd heard. All foods can be categorized into 4 groups: sandwich, salad, soup, or ravioli. In other words, by this definition, a taco would be a sandwich, carb used to hold ingredients, open edges, whereas a calzone or a Pop-Tart would be classified as a ravioli. This is obviously a ridiculous position, but most of us were used to this guy's nonsense. However, one of the other guys at the table is from New York and took issue with this. He had never met the lawyer before this weekend. Things started getting heated. The more upset at these categories the guy from New York became, the more the lawyer doubled down and gave increasingly preposterous explanations and logic. "What about spaghetti, you faker? Clearly a salad. It's tossed ingredients with a dressing." Meanwhile, the rest of us were starting to lose it at how upset the New Yorker was getting. It culminated in the guy from New York standing up out of his chair, slamming his hands against the table and passionately screaming, "Pizza is not a faking sandwich, goddammit," while the rest of us were crying laughing. Good times. Edit. You guys get it. The debate below about the various foods and how to categorize them is exactly the sort of discourse that precipitates people getting violent at bachelor parties. So at lunch in HS my friend group had one kid who was always the butt of the joke. Let's call him Simon. Simon always got made fun of because well, he was an awkward kid. There was only 4 of us, and sometimes Simon took it a little hard, so when walking with him to lunch I told him that he's gotta push back and not just take it all, nobody will respect him. I told him that when the other people bust his chops he's gotta say some shit back, and I'll back him up. We get to lunch, and I'm thinking I just imparted some great wisdom in this kid, when we see our buddies Parthik and Ranello laughing at some stupid joke. Simon, thinking they're laughing at him, stomps right up to them with a smile of malice on his face. "Something funny, Ranello," he says as Ranello is in hysterics. Simon then grabs his pizza stick, the lunch entree, dips it ketchup, and smears it all over Ranello's face. "You like that, you cheesy fuck?" Simon says. The hysterical laughter at the table, which was not directed at Simon before, now is. Ranello is now laughing at the absurdity of the situation, unable to get a word out, as Simon is molesting his face with a pizza stick, asking him if he's enjoying, as Ranello mouths the words "what the fuck?" between bouts of laughter. Eventually things calmed down, and they explained to Simon that they were not, in fact, laughing at him when he approached the table. Had a college choir teacher who used these weird analogies. Really talented but really weird analogies. She taught us to project a richer tone by using our sinuses rather than just our throat, by telling us to think of our heads as great big basketballs with air flowing through the basketball. Okay lady, my head's a basketball? Another time, we were doing a song with a lot of rubato. The tempo speeds up and slows down depending on artistic styling from the conductor. She told us to imagine we are batters at batting practice. The pitching machine doesn't pitch balls at the same tempo, or on game day, if the opposing team's pitcher pitches slightly faster or slower, we'll strike out. So watch her like a pitching machine. She never ever used the same analogy twice, except once. We had a regional competition coming up and everyone expected us to win. The director calls the dean and some college administration to come watch us practice. Choir teacher has us do sectionals, which means one person from every section steps forward to sing for the rest of the group. No hiding your flaws behind others. I was called forward to represent bass/baritone section. We are doing the song with rubato, and the whole group is behind. She's not working with us to help us catch up. She's making a show of going faster and faster. Finally she stops us. "You're not keeping up with me." I protest, "It feels like you're directing the song too fast." She points at me and sternly says, "Your balls don't come at the same time." Now here's the thing. This part wasn't what was so funny. This woman was just as sweet as can be, very prim and proper. She was very good at hosting dinners, very well spoken, not a dirty or edgy bone in her body. So I didn't get all juvenile. Had she been edgy, we'd have just had a chuckle and moved on. But instead I stood there like a dullard. Could she mean? No, not that. But, then what? I'm looking around at my peers and they're all kind of nodding in agreement. Yep, she's got a good point. The balls do not, in point of fact, come at the same time. True. Finally, I managed to croak out a very confused what? Her son was in the choir with us. God bless him. He knew what was going on in my shitty brain. And he tried to be discreet. He casually suggests, "She's, talking about the pitching machine." Relief washed over me. Of course. Now it all made sense. I said oh like the goddamn stoner I was, and was ready to move on with my life. That's when everyone started pointing and laughing at me, and the choir teacher's face went dark red. I tried so hard to stop laughing. She left the room, nearly in tears, and I followed her trying to apologize while doing that squeal speech thing you do when you're trying to talk while laughing. "I'm sorry for being so immature, glick, I didn't mean to offend you, hnnngh. Back in my late teens, myself and a couple friends smoked a massive joint, and we got the munches. We are walking down the street at 2 AM in search of something that is open, and we see this convenience store. We walk in, baked out of our minds, and beeline for the candy/junk food aisle. Our heads are just exploding with the possibilities. The sales clerk is just standing there looking at us. There is nobody else in the store, and it is dead silent. My friend then picks up this box of our caramels and says, oh my god, this. We are standing there in this store at 2 AM drooling over this box of our caramels for what seems like eternity. We finally decide to buy it, but we can't work up the courage to face this clerk while so high. So we are arguing quietly amongst ourselves trying to figure out who will go pay for this thing. After 2 to 3 minutes of no, you buy it. No, you buy it. We decide nobody can face this guy. So now we are standing in this store, and with the inability to buy anything, now we feel trapped, cause this store clerk is watching us, and we obviously walked in to buy something. How do we make our escape? My one friend then starts to laugh at how ridiculous the situation is, or well, she is trying to hold in a laugh, but it is slowly escaping like a held sneeze. She can't hold it any longer, and just starts laughing hysterically, like tears rolling down her face laughing. She is looking at us just dying of laughter. My other friend then just looks at me and just bolts for the door. I then did the same, and my other friend, who is still laughing uncontrollably, drops the caramels in the middle of the aisle and follows suit. We burst out to the parking lot, all of us laughing uncontrollably. We look back into the convenience store from afar and see the clerk just looking out at us with this perplexed look on his face. We are all bent over in laughter for the next 3 minutes or so. We finally gather ourselves, wipe the tears, and walk away like nothing happened. Posted this in another thread before. So my girlfriend and I, at the time, were on a vacation and decided to go gambling at a casino. We were about done and saw a photo booth and decided to get our pic taken. The one we picked was a wedding photo. When we started dating, we had decided to not get married, so it was kind of a joke. We put our money in and picked it, but it was only for one person. We were kind of disappointed as we wanted a fake wedding pic together. Instantly an idea came to mind. I said, I got this. Leaned over and held up my hand to the camera and gave it the finger. We kind of giggled about it until the photo printed out and we got a good look at it. So you have a wedding photo with the bride smiling wide and a groom with a hand giving the middle finger for the head. We immediately started cracking up and could not stop. We decided to call it a night and walk back to the car laughing harder than we both had ever before, with tears running down our face. Once we calmed down, we looked at the photo again and immediately started laughing again for another couple of minimum. We told a few people who had been pressuring us to get married that we had got married on our vacation and sent them the pic after they said congratulations and proceeded to laugh ours off. To this day it's still stuck to our fridge. We also got married a few years later. TLDR went into a photo booth and gave it the finger. One of our best photos came out and we laughed harder than we ever did. Maybe not the hardest I've laughed, but this one translates well to text and was still faking hilarious at the time. This was actually just about a month ago, mid-September. My roommates and I all smoke, them a bit more than me, and two of them were out on the porch with some other people. One of our friends walks in, saying that apparently my roommates were in a heated argument, but it turns out they were making a bet with each other. My friend, let's say Jay, bets my other friend, let's say Cole, $50, that Cole can't go an entire week without smoking or drinking, and Cole takes the bet. It goes Tuesday to Tuesday, and all is going well, barring a slightly agitated Cole. Jay eventually lowers the bet to $25 and takes the drinking clause out of it, so Cole can get faked up over the weekend. Monday night comes, and a total of like 6 of us are in our apartment, bowls and bongs packed, ready for the clock to strike midnight. When it does, the kitchen becomes foggier than Smogs' hole, and people are jetting jiggly and celebrating Cole's great feat. I mention how this feels like a sort of Passover holiday, and we all joke, questioning if this is how religions get started. We joke about Cole being our savior, and agree that we should celebrate this week every year. Well, Jay takes out his phone to put in a reminder, and the moment he sees his calendar, he starts to do that dry wee sort of startup laugh until he is full blown crying out of laughter. We all look at him to see what's up, and he just looks up and yells. It starts on 9/11. We were in absolute tears laughing, realizing that this truly was how religions were started. And I'll be damned if I don't celebrate that week of sobriety every year, god damn it. I was getting Mexican with my best friend and her new boyfriend. She was intensely into him and was still in the fluttery infatuation stage, so she was putting on her best face, dressing cute, saying all the right things, etc. Her boyfriend excuses himself to the restroom. Soon after she sneezes, hard and loud, right after she takes a massive bite of a bean burrito. Instead of continuing on, she keeps her head down almost to her chest and is making a weird breathing noise. Alarmed, I asked her if she was okay or if she was choking. She lifts up her head and I can see she is not choking. Rather, the sheer force of her sneeze caused her to inhale refried beans from her mouth into her nose, which is now flowing from her nostrils onto the table. To top it off, her eyes are now huge with horror and confusion as she glances to the direction where her beau slipped off to, and I can tell she is praying he isn't on his way back. It takes me a few moments to understand what I'm seeing, but when I finally do, I burst out laughing. I'm no longer in charge of my body, I'm a slave to it now. After I start laughing, she tries to say, please don't tell him, but you see, she never swallowed the rest of the beans. So as she says this, partially chewed bean burrito starts slipping out of her mouth. The whole visual of my beautiful darling friend with refried beans pouring out of her nose and mouth with her eyes helpless and massive with horror, while the love of her life could be back at any minute. The pleading fear in her voice. It was also absurd that I was laughing so hard I thought I would actually die. She was able to successfully clean herself up before her boyfriend returned, but I was not able to get myself together. I was laughing so hard tears were streaming down my cheeks. By this time, she had started laughing too, and we both got caught in a laugh cycle where we were just feeding off each other. Her poor boyfriend asked what was so funny, but we could barely speak at that point. It took us about 10 minutes to get a hold of ourselves, and even at that point we couldn't make eye contact without laughing again. For the record, I never told him. They're married now, so I might have to one day. TLDR, best friend leaks refried beans from several orifices, while the man of her dreams is just around the corner. I was on a 13-hour road trip and there were 4 of us in Insuv. We were coming back from a rugby tournament and everyone, except the driver, was crushing road beers. Now in order to maximize our travel time we went ahead and got 2 of those wider-mouthed bottles of Gatorade. We would drink the Gatorade and use the empties to pee into and pour out the window as we drove. I thought this was hilarious, and it went well for a majority of the trip. That is until my friend beside me in the backseat requested one of the pee bottles. Important to note here that the other pee bottle was currently occupied. So he starts using one of the pee bottles, and he gets halfway, and it doesn't sound like he's slowing down. So he starts requesting the use of the second pee bottle. However, as I mentioned, it was currently being used by another member of our party. He begins to get frantic as the bottle begins to get closer to the top. The other pee bottle is being emptied out the window as fast as the laws of physics will allow. All the while my friend is growing more and more frantic at the prospect of peeing all over himself. The driver is constantly looking in the rear view to see if his backseat of his SUV is going to be decimated by urine. The passenger in the front seat is holding the other pee bottle out the window and yelling an eater on its usability, and here I'm in the back seat watching all of this go down, not knowing whether I'll be covered in urine or witness the greatest high stakes relay event in my lifetime. My friend peeing in the bottle, realizing he's about to run out of room, says he's going to try and pinch his flow off to try and give my other friend who is emptying the bottle precious time. Just as he's run out of room in his bottle, my friend in the passenger seat exclaims that his is empty. The empty bottle is passed back in a flurry of hands and excitement as I grab it to pass to my friend who had just pinched off his flow. But he doesn't reach for it straight away. Instead he looks at me with an empty pee bottle in my hand ready to give it to him, and just kind of half shrugs and says that I don't need it anymore. I pissed my pants. He then gestures down, and my eyes follow to a huge wet stain covering his underpants, completely soaked through the whole front, as if he went for a quick swim. Because of all the excitement and adrenaline and bizarreness of everything, we all just broke down laughing, and I laughed so hard my contacts fell out of my eyes. Still have never laughed so hard before, and I'm sorry if this didn't do it any justice. In my student house last year we ran out of toilet paper and were all way too lazy to go to the shop and buy some. so we just decided to use kitchen roll, which resulted in the toilet becoming very blocked. After deciding to just leave the blocked toilet to its own devices and see what happens, me and my best friend go for a night out, get stupid drunk and return home. My bedroom was next to the bathroom, so I could hear almost everything that went on in there, so very clearly heard my very hungover friend running into the bathroom, realizing the toilet was blocked, and kind of yelling in a crazed panicked way. He knocks on my door looking a little bit in pain, and asks how he should pup if the toilet is blocked. I reply with maybe in the garden, maybe into a bag. He takes me up on the bag idea and goes to get a carrier bag from the kitchen. He then returns to my room to ask how he should do it. I suggest squatting over it and folding the opening of the bag over itself to create a more structurally sound pup hole. He pauses for a second, looks at me, and then realizes that I've already done that exact thing earlier in the morning. Disgust, disappointment, and hilarity ensue. Friend then goes into the bathroom and locks the door. Obviously, he may as well not have, cause I can hear everything through the wall anyway. Every subtle moan and soft thud of pup on floor will forever be in my mind. When he's finished, he walks out of the bathroom with a small blue carrier bag full of pup. We are both crying at this point, either tears of laughter or repulsion. We spend a good amount of time discussing how best to dispose of his pup bag. Mine was stealthily chucked in a neighbor's bin. After a while of him faking with me by almost swaying his pup bag into my face and us both running around the house, he decides to throw it away. He opens the front door, revealing the pup bag to the world and the postman, who is literally right outside our door. I still crack the fuck up about this on a regular basis. I have a picture of friend proudly holding his pup bag, but I have vowed to never let it see the wider world. Very late to the party here, but here goes. I live with my boyfriend, and around a year ago we'd invited my 6-year-old brother to stay the night and have an epic sleepover. This was the first time we'd ever had him overnight, and it was awesome. Anyway, my mother neglected to tell me that my brother often will get up in the middle of the night and climb into bed with her. No crying or nightmares, he just enjoys a midnight cuddle. So, my brother is sleeping in our spare room. My boyfriend and I are now fast asleep in our own room. It must be around 2 AM. My boyfriend is lying on his side, facing the open bedroom door that looks directly into the landing. My brother's spare room had these pink/red fairy lights on, and as I'd left his door open, it had illuminated the whole of the upstairs in a low red glow. So, we're all fast asleep. I then suddenly am jolted awake by horrendously, ear-piercingly, high-pitched screams of utter terror. I'd say they lasted around 6 seconds. I jump up, trembling, to find my boyfriend wailing like Marv off Home Alone when the spider gets put on his face. I'm screaming, "What's wrong? What's happening?" I have never heard this noise come from this man in all our 5 years together. Ever. He suddenly stops and says, "Oh, hey Marta Pop's brother, calm as can be." I see my little brother standing in the hallway with the most sheet-eating grin. So, he'd woken up in the middle of the night to come into our room and saw my boyfriend first. He'd began whispering my boyfriend's name whilst standing outside our door with an ominous, deathly, almost hellish glow lighting him. So in my boyfriend's days, he saw the silhouette of a small demon, no distinguishable facial features, which is why he began to scream those death note screams of hysteria and terror. Once I pieced everything together, coupled with my brother's utter delight at the situation, I lost it. I absolutely started to wail with laughter, ears streaming. Then my brother started laughing, and once the color returned to his face, my partner started to laugh. I pulled my baby brother into the bed, and the fallen adrenaline rush made my partner fall straight back to sleep. But my brother and I lay there suppressing tears of laughter for a good half hour. Each time one of us would get it together and get quiet, the other would start all over again. Easily one of the funniest faking experiences of my life. I wish his screams were recorded. A few years back, I was in a small bubble tea shop with my girlfriend and a friend hanging out. While we were there was another couple who was looked to be on a study date or just hanging out. There's no one else there other than us and the people working. I'm the only one sitting to face them. As the evening passes, the other couple try their hand at those electronic dart games. It's basically just a regular dartboard, but with special darts that stick into an electronic rubber board that tracks your score. The girl has no idea how to play darts, so her date shows her by throwing a few as an example. After a bit, she gets the courage to try it out. She gets ready, winds up, and releases. Wham! She throws the dart right at the bottom of the hollow plastic machine with the hardest throw she could muster. She made it look like she was real angry at that machine for hurting her family. That noise was so loud, everyone there turned to look, but didn't want to make a big deal, because we could all see that it was her first time. I laugh a little bit, and my girlfriend takes notice. Not to be discouraged, her date asks her to try again, but maybe to aim a little higher this time. Again, she winds up and releases. Wham! Again, she misses her target, only this time, she hit the sign at the very top of the machine. I'm sure she felt a little embarrassed and stopped. At the time, I felt bad for trying to stifle the biggest laugh I've ever had, because it was a small store and mostly quiet, but goddamn did I nearly piss myself laughing. And of course, all of this happens in the 2 minutes that my friend goes to the washroom. Not only did I have to control one of the biggest laughs in my life, I had to explain what happened to my friend about 2 minutes after I could speak again without crying of laughter. TLDR, girl hits 2 beautifully executed bullseyes. I know I'm late, but this story still makes me laugh so hard I can hardly tell it. One night I was spending the night in my parents' trailer. I was visiting from college and my dog lived with them at the time, so he generally slept with me while I was there. The layout of the trailer is simple. On one side is a living room with 2 recliners, a couch, and a TV. Crammed next to that area is a small round table with 3 chairs and a minuscule kitchen. Then there's a step and a ridiculously tiny bathroom, and then the bedroom. That night I had walked the dog and we both piled onto the couch to sleep. Within a few hours, I woke up to my dad's voice and a raunchy, disgusting scent. "Did you fetched? Or did you sheet?" he asked, and I realized my dog was missing. I heard the bed creak, and my dad get out of bed, and almost immediately, in the most deadpan and broken tone, he goes, "Oh, my god." At this point I was still lying on the couch in the dark, so my dad assumed I was asleep, and told me to get up, coughing and between more exclamations of "oh my god." Half asleep, I asked what was wrong. As it turned out, my dog had gotten an upset stomach and spewed liquid sheet all over the kitchen linoleum. He's part lab, boxer, and pit bull, so he is not a small boy, and apparently his bowels were endless. It smelled like absolute death, like a corpse covered in vomit, was sitting in the sun for hours on end. The floor was totally covered. As soon as my dad said, "Jesus Christ, your dog shit all over the goddamn kitchen," I lost my goddamn mind. I skipped laughing and went straight to sobbing. My whole body was shaking so hard that I was actually moving the whole trailer and woke my mother up in the bedroom. She heard me crying and asked what was wrong. I tried to tell her, but couldn't choke it out between all of the sobs and tears. All I could get out was Deku, which is my dog's name, and sheet. She was actually more angry that I woke her up than anything else, and my dad ended up cleaning the kitchen while I tried to regain control of my lungs. My dad seemed to find it much less funny. My girlfriend, now fiancé, a couple of years ago. This is one of those situations where you really had to be there, but fuck it, I have a keyboard in front of me and 5 minutes to type, so you're getting it. We had a party in the summer. I've never really considered myself a party person, and definitely not a host, but it turned out I had a really good time and got nicely hammered. I'm not much of a drinker, generally, but I had a skinful. Her son, 22, was mixing me vodka and coke, the bastard, and as the party was winding down, about 2 AM, those of still around just sat on the deck to shoot the sheet. Eventually we went to bed. I woke up the next day feeling like shit, entirely deserved, but eventually I make it downstairs to where the half a dozen or so people who stayed over are having coffee. They all look at me weirdly. Odd, but nothing that new, tbh. Anyway, after 5 minutes, girlfriend looks at me and says, "You said you remember everything you say when you're drunk, right?" Me, "Yes, why?" Huh, "So do you remember what you were talking about last night?" Me, Long story short, apparently the conversation had turned to pornography, and not only was I amazed at one lady present saying she has some porn on DVD, not the fact that a woman would watch porn, but that it was a DVD FFS, I decided to tell everybody present how much I love porn, and then went into detail talking about the various themes and subtypes I look at most. I still don't remember any of this, and it's not, even though I do love porn any more than any other dude who spent a large part of his early 30s single. That's not the funny bit though, it did become kind of a running gag with us for the next few months, but nothing spectacular, and I figured I was kind of due for some ribbing given that I still don't remember it. That October, we are out to dinner with a couple of the friends who happened to have been at the party, and hence know the porn story, and the conversation gets around to the Olympics. I go on this, probably boring, monologue about how much I love the Olympics, even the sillier sports like ice skating, because I always appreciate when people can do things well that I know I'll never be good at. This is when a lady of mine jumps in and says, is that why you love porn? After a brief pause I and the others burst out laughing to the extent that I was close to tears. Usually I'm the funny one, quips, puns, etc, but her timing that night was so perfect that I still tell the story now, even though I was the butt, as it were. I was like 14 or so. A buddy of mine lived like 3 houses further in the street and we were really close friends. One day he told me a story about something he did that day. Just picture this in your mind. He lived, with his parents of course at 14, in a house with 2 floors. Living room downstairs with nice big windows at the front and the back of the house. 2 bedrooms upstairs. Just windows at the front and a nice balcony with cloth lines at the back. He had this thing to clean the chimney with. His dad probably left it upstairs after using it. You know, a ball with metal hairs on it. English is my second language so bear with me, and a rope attached to it, so you can lower it down the chimney and lift it up again. They have a nice garden with mostly grass out back, and he was curious what would happen if he threw that thing from the 2nd floor balcony on the grass. Why? We were 14. So, he picked up the thing, checked if nobody was standing in the garden, and gave it a good throw over the edge of the balcony. A good throw with some good speed. And then, he told me with a straight face, the end of the rope got stuck on the cloth lines. I nearly pissed myself. Couldn't breathe anymore. Tears running down my face from laughing. Of course being 14 helped a lot, but I never laughed that hard again. The thing swung right into the big rear window of the 1st floor. Parents were sitting in the living room and nearly got a heart attack, as did he, as he was trying to think of escape routes. He considered jumping off the balcony but eventually didn't, because if the shock the punishment from his parents wasn't even that bad, so he got lucky. Here's a word of advice, don't attend a car crash as part of a first date. I was 19 years old and recently single when I first tried my hand at online dating, and suffice to say, it didn't go well for me. Whether because of problems with my profile, my unrealistic standards, or just sheer bad luck, I seemed entirely unable to find anyone with whom I actually felt a connection. Finally, almost as an act of surrender, I agreed to meet for coffee with a young woman, whose self-description had painted a picture of an interesting, but physically unattractive individual. We made plans to visit a cafe near the beach, and I set out with only barely flickering enthusiasm. To my surprise, the girl turned out to be much more appealing in person than she'd appeared on the internet. I even told her as much, and she confessed to having intentionally offered images that downplayed her beauty. It was a rather pleasant turn of events, and since the young woman claimed to find me similarly entice, the 2 of us sat down near the coffee shop's front window for what I was certain would be a mutually enjoyable first encounter. We spent a few minutes debating what to order and who would pay for the first round, then turned our attentions to one another in full. Just as the conversation was getting started, though, we were interrupted by the loud screech, pop, and crunch of a fishtailing car plowing into a nearby tree. As is wont to happen in such circumstances, many of the other customers gathered around to gawk at the scene. Murmurs of speculation rippled through the small crowd as we all watched the car's driver climb out and survey the damage, followed by gasps of shock and alarm as people noticed that her head was bleeding. One of the cafe's employees went to call 911 and my date asked if we should try to help the woman. I was about to respond with my agreement, but the words never came out, largely because they were replaced by uproarious laughter. Please understand, I wasn't making light of the car crash. In fact, at the exact moment that I'd been encouraged to assist, I'd caught sight of something that my brain decided was too funny to ignore. From behind the wreckage, there came an enormous, almost spherical, man riding on a motorized bicycle. He looked to be about 50, had an expression of intense concentration on his face, and was moving so slowly that it really seemed like he should have toppled over. Each of the man's limbs were frozen in place, statue-like, as the dull whine of the vehicle's motor struggled to inch him forward. I don't know why I found that so amusing, but I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Tears of mirth clouded my vision, and no matter how hard I tried to restrain myself, I just couldn't stymie my amused outburst. Needless to say, it didn't make the best impression on the girl across the table from me, and I could feel the disapproving stares of the other patrons from all around. I did finally manage to explain what had caused me to break down like I had, but I'm not convinced that the young woman believed me. We didn't have a second date, but to be honest, I still chuckle to myself when I picture the man on his moped. TLDR, my first date with a girl was a literal car wreck, but it also gave me my funniest memory. I was hanging with a friend and we were joking and talking about how silly it is when it's considered a faux pas to wear a brown belt with black slacks. We have this other running joke that I had a tail that was surgically removed when I was a baby because I have a little dent right at the end of my spine. Weird joke, I know, but funny to us. Suddenly I start losing it and can't explain why. I have this vivid image in my head that is cracking me up, and every time I try to stop and explain I look at his confused face and laugh even harder. I'm actually crying laughing, which I don't think I've ever done before. Anyways, so what I've been picturing is this guy hanging out with his buddies at the office near a water cooler. Some of the dudes start smirking about how this guy has a brown belt with black slacks and think they've got a great put down on him. But the guy is just like, oh nah guys, total misunderstanding. This is just my tail. And then he shows everyone and they're like. I eventually got it together enough to explain, and he didn't think it was as funny as I did, but he enjoyed how much I was enjoying myself. It doesn't make sense and it's probably completely ridiculous to read, because it's ridiculous to write. But that was the hardest I've ever laughed, and even writing it now has me smiling. Me and my little brother and older sister were with my parents visiting my grandparents. It had just snowed. We wanted to get my mischievous grandpa back for nailing us with hard, frozen snowballs the previous snowy visit the year before. We devised a plan to get him outside and vulnerable. We lied and said we heard a water leak outside by the front part of the house. Thanks Dad for the tip. It worked like a charm. I remember vividly exclaiming, "I hear water leaking outside," and my grandpa's gruff voice barking out, "Where?" from another room as he scrambled to get his shoes on. I got him outside in the front yard and surprisingly he bent over to better check his water hose spigot in the bushes. My sister and brother came from the side of the house with tons of snowballs in their hands. We got a few good hits in before he could realize the ambush unfolding before him. As he quickly retreated up the front porch steps, he snarled, "You little snots." My sister got a snowball right on his butt, and I will forever have ingrained in my memory the day grandpa got hit with a snowball in the ass and looked like a goddamn bunny rabbit. My granny locked him out on purpose so we could throw more snowballs at him, but we were too busy gasping for air as we laughed so hard we peed our pants. My sister and I sounded like we were dying as we rolled on the ground in our hysterics. My little brother continued like the good soldier he was, throwing as best as he could as grandpa fumbled for his front door keys. What was the most impressive was that despite the situation grandpa was in, being locked out and fumbling for his keys to get inside, he still had enough sense to stomp the snow off his feet before entering the house. I can't be sure, but I think I was around 11 years old. It was around that time that I used to spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house so that I would have someone watching over me while my parents were at work. One of those days my grandpa's who was a public notary secretary, came over for a visit and brought her kid, around the same age as me, along. So naturally we were left to figure out which way is best to spend our time. My grandparents lived in an old-fashioned house, in the city nonetheless, and had a chicken pen. It was a season for onions, since there were some onions fresh from the garden lying around waiting to be washed and used later. There were many of them, so I figured I could borrow some. I picked one up and threw it over the hen house. My mate did the same and picked an onion and threw it over the pen as well. At some point we agreed that this was a show of dexterity and mastery. So we did this maybe one more time. Granted, we would have picked up the onions that ended up over the pen later. It was then that I figured I must throw the furthest and highest of us too. So I picked an onion and swung my arm a few times, a strategy employed by many cartoon characters, and threw it with all my might, aiming high and without doubt. Now at this point the visual and auditory aspects of the result were very homogeneous and were unexpected to see and hear. The onion wasn't flying over. On its path it hit a part of the metal roofing of the hen house/hay storage, ensuring a representative thunk, then fell inside the chicken's water pot, ensuring a representative pluck and chicken scatter. I turned around and saw my friend holding his waist and falling to the ground. I followed his reaction. It was a magnificently built up attempt that failed both our expectations apparently. Secondly, birds probably have a sense of collective awareness that they employ mid-flight. If a bird sees danger and can act to avoid it, but the others can't see it, they will assume the threat anyway and follow the response of that first bird. Maybe the thunk of the metal alerted some to spread or duck for cover, and maybe they saw us fall to the ground shot by that obvious threat as well. That is a great explanation for why a pigeon flew straight into the closed windows of a kiosk that was a few feet away from us. That did it. I changed color and couldn't see anything anymore because my eyes were closed, and the plop of the onion and that pigeon's dive were the last thing I saw. Grandma came to check on us and asked what had happened. As I was explaining, I was regaining my lost composure. I can feel the blood rush and all around just joyous feeling to this day. That has to be one of my most hilarious experiences. When I was back in university, I went on a charity hitchhike across Europe with a friend. Near the end of our trip, heading for Marrakesh, we decided to stop in Gibraltar and go up to the top of the rock. As we pay admission and head up, the woman at the counter warns us that the monkeys are pretty fearless and will grab anything that looks like it may contain food. She specifically pointed out my friend's black plastic bag, to which my friend brushed off and said that it would be okay. Cut to 10 minutes later, we are on top of the rock and the monkeys are hanging around, eyeing my friend suspiciously. A big one approaches from behind him, and, just as I turn around, it grabs his black bag. My friend, grabbing the bag as tightly as he could, panic across his face, looks at the monkey, and says, "Give it back." Underestimating the monkey's strength, how often do you stand off against one? With one great yank, the monkey takes the bag from him, running with it to the wall on the edge of the cliff. Again, my friend stares it down and yells, "Give it back." The monkey, clearly amused, does a little dance with the bag and casually tossed it off the cliff, jumping after it. My friend looks back at me in horror. I'm already laughing hard, but not as much as when he tells me that he was keeping his passport, money, and diary all in that plastic bag. I feel bad for laughing, but honestly, funniest thing to ever happen to me. Who puts everything important in a plastic bag when traveling? Cut to 10 minutes later, he literally scaled a wall and managed to retrieve the torn up contents of the bag. Passport made it back pretty intact, but a record he had in the bag has a monkey bite shaped piece missing. Mid 2000s, I was 16 years old, and I was with two of my high school friends who were both my age. Like most 16-year-olds, we had just gotten our licenses, and so we spent most weekends just driving around. My cousin is driving his back '95 Camry, I'm in the passenger seat, and my other friend was in the passenger side back seat, right behind me. This friend was that one guy that almost every friend group has. He was the Kenny, South Park, of the group. Broken home, pretty poor, had his first beer at 8, and spent most afternoons after elementary school watching MTV, and that one fuzzy bad signal born station that came on TV. Beavis and Butthead raised this guy. We are driving through random neighbors just chillin', when all of a sudden my buddy in the back says, "Dude, what's today?" UHH, Thursday. Why? We replied. He then says, with the excitement of a child waking up to realize it's Christmas morning, "Tomorrow's trash day. Pull over." So my cousin pulls over in front of this house. It's like 11 at night. My buddy in the back rolls down his window, sticks his arm out, and grabs the handle of this trash can. Being that the next day was trash pickup day, all the cans, which are big and green, and have 2 wheels and a handle, are full of trash, and at the street, weighing prob 200 pounds easy. He then tells my cousin to start driving. He gets up to maybe 35 miles per hour in this neighborhood. My buddy tells him to get closer to the curb. My buddy waits for the perfect moment, and let's go. Caplo. RIP mailbox. This thing coasts perfectly for a few feet right into it, which soon becomes airborne. Trash erupts everywhere. The sound was sensational. Kinda like when someone gets rocked in the face by a dodgeball and you hear that perfect bruising. It was awesome. Shit is everywhere, and the mailbox flies like 10 feet. I've never laughed so hard in my life. I thought I was going to choke. I thought my cousin was going to wreck, because he too was so caught by surprise and laughing. We returned the next morning around 8:30, and actually saw the homie Arwanas outside, with all their neighbors standing there with that perfect what in the fuck face. My cousin and I felt kinda bad, especially since the one mailbox was totally destroyed, but man, that was hilarious. I still think about it when I'm having a bad day. My first real job was at a gas station that my best friend worked at, and his dad was the manager. His dad hired a new guy to replace him as he was retiring, and the new guy was a terrible drunk. The station went downhill fast, and even the owner stopped giving a shit. We decided to pitch the idea of having it open 24/7 on Friday and Saturday nights. We were right off the highway and everyone in the area loved the idea. One guy was crazy and decided he wanted to destroy our old security camera TV because we just got a new one and nobody wanted to take the old one. He goes around back and gets on the roof of the station with the TV, preparing to throw it off the roof. As he is doing this, 2 cars pull up and stop right in front of the building. 2 girls get out and go inside. As they are inside, my friend on the roof takes that and goes to throw it. We yell at him that there are people parked there. He panics and instead of stopping, grabs the power cable. The TV snaps back and dangles for a few seconds, but then falls inches from the hood of the first SUV. The girls look out from the building, horrified. I'm rolling around in the parking lot laughing so hard that I can't breathe and almost pass out. The girls run out, get in their SUVs and drive off. The guy on the roof is laughing like an asshole and the guy working the counter comes out laughing. He said that they were asking if they could park one of their cars there overnight. As soon as the TV hit the ground, the girl asking said holy fuck run, and they took off. One of the best gas station nights of my life. I'm prone to laughing fits. It's often a forgettable joke that sets it off. My first memorable laughing fit was when I was 13, watching The Simpsons. Mr. Burns attempted to throw a smoke grenade. It landed about a foot in front of him and went off. It cuts away, and then cuts back to Smithers readying and throwing a new grenade whilst Mr. Burns is high on smoke fumes, singing. I was walking through the gas one day. That had me down for about half an hour. Other jokes were during various films and TV shows. In Captain America, when Howard Stark is testing an infinity stone, and it blasts him across the room. He then exclaims, "Write that down." I embarrass my then girlfriend by laughing on and off for the next 15 minutes. People were getting angry as I desperately tried and failed to stop. In one of the Muppets films, the big bear guy places his eyes on an eye scanner designed to let him into a secure room. There's a bright flash as it scans his eyes. He then turns back to face the camera, and you see his eyes for literally the first time ever. Even now this has me smiling. Ed is demonstrating reverse psychology to Eddie. He tells Ed to not eat that dirt. Ed immediately shrugs it off, laughing slightly to himself. After a second's pause, he glances back at the dirt and can't help but eat it. My brothers and I reference this joke more often than you'd think, and various permutations of it have always made have a laughing fit. The latest version of this was when I was watching Interstellar with my youngest brother. We had just started the scene where the ship is approaching the wormhole to depart into a distant solar system. My brother then said, "Now Ed, don't you lick that wormhole," and then did the signature laugh that Ed replies with. That once again got me for about 20 minutes. My absolute worst experience with a laughing fit, and pretty bad experience in general, was when I was on a first date. We made plans to go see X-Men: Apocalypse. Upon arriving at the cinema, we discovered it had stopped playing the day previous, so we elected to go watch Finding Dory. At the point in the film where the octopus is slinking around the room, he descends into a sink and then reaches up from the sink to flip a switch. The switch activates a garbage disposal, and he quickly lets out a surprised yelp before turning it back off. I spent about half an hour trying to stifle my laughter as my date stared in disbelief at how long I was laughing for. There was not a second date. At a music festival, Hurricane Festival in Germany, a dude climbed the row of porta potties and started running along the roofs. The crowd was cheering him on. The roofs were really wobbly below his feet because they are made out of thin plastic. At 2/3 of the row he crashed through the roof into the porta potty. For 2 seconds nothing happens, then the door of the porta potty swings wide open and a screaming lady with pants down to her ankles comes running out of the porta potty, running away to the left. He comes out and runs to the right. Everybody was laughing like crazy, and 10 minutes after that, a guy tried to jump a hip-high wall, which, on the other side, all guys had used to pee against. There was a lake of piss on the other side. He jumped up the wall, misses the step, his body crashes against the wall, and due to his momentum and the low height of the wall did act as a lever point, and he flips above the wall, headfirst into the piss lake. The lake was far bigger than the length of his body, and he was completely soaked. When I went back to the camp to my buddies I was like I saw the craziest thing ever. You won't believe me, and somebody else interrupted me and was like, "Thank God, you have seen it as well." I thought nobody would believe me. One of my old coworkers and good friend was infamous for the most putrid smelling fatchts imaginable. When we went to school together, he would fatcht in the hallway and the smell would travel across the entire floor. It would clear some people out of their dorm rooms, and others that were in the hallway would run downstairs to get away. It was terrible. So sometimes, he would cover up the sound of his fatcht with a cough, just so he could blame it on someone else. But everyone already knew that, if it smelled that bad, that it was him. Eventually he got used to the reality, but I still caught him doing it every now and then, depending on the company. Fast forward to a few years ago, we were at work in the back room. Our supervisor was telling us how to complete the task he gave us when I hear a gut-wrenching, sloppy suppy mud pile of sheet explode out of my buddy's hole. My eyes dart to his, and he slowly turns towards me and looks me in the eye. Everyone got silent. Then he took his hand and curled it into a fist, all while maintaining eye contact with me, then brought the fist to his mouth and daintily coughed. It was at that moment I believed I would actually die. My knees buckled, and I was on the floor laughing so hard and loud that people stopped by to see if I needed help. I was crying. Snot was coming out my nose. I was losing my mind. Funniest experience of my life. Many years ago, when I was younger, a friend decided on a rather hot summer's day to have a BBQ for myself and a bunch of our friends in the back garden of his mum's house. For the majority of the time we were being annoyed by random wasps that had made a nest in a 6 feet tall hedge in his front garden. So after a few hours of heavy drinking, the men of the group decided the best course of action was to attack and destroy the nest with an aerosol cannon lighter. No one seemed to have the guts to get close to the wasps without fear of getting stung, so with the permission of the homie Arwana's son, I stepped up to the plate. Unbeknownst to me, the inside of the hedge was dry and barren wasteland of dead wood. One quick spray of flame and the whole faking thing lit up like a bonfire doused in petrol. In an absolute panic, we drunkenly attempted to try get some buckets of water to throw over it, however it proved useless. Someone thankfully had the sense to phone the fire brigade, and then all we could do was stand and watch this inferno, praying that it didn't cross to the house, which was only meters away. The crackling sound this thing gave off coupled with our panicked shouting ended up attracting quite a few of the neighbors, and at one point a guy who lived in the same row of houses looked out of his front door, darted back in, and then almost immediately shot back out with a kid under each arm, and moved them to a safe distance. Fire brigade showed up not long after, and put the fire out. No damage to anything, except the hedge, and no one was injured thankfully, although the fire chief tore us all a new one, after he was informed of what had happened. Once everything had calmed down we sat, and laughed for about an hour straight reminiscing, and even to this day I laugh thinking about it. Maybe not in my entire life, but definitely the hardest I've laughed recently. I work for a university that is always undergoing some kind of construction. A few months ago, they tore down an old engineering building to make room for a new one. In a cornerstone of the old one, there was a time capsule from 1906. It was hyped up all week, then they did an FB Live video to reveal the contents. At least 2 of the 3 people presenting it knew before the reveal what the contents looked like, which makes what happened funnier in my opinion. The 3 presenters, a library employee, the university archivist, and a history professor, spent 7 minutes discussing the box, how it was soldered shut, how it was made of lead, how it looked great for being 112 years old. Then finally, the big reveal. And it was, drumroll please, 0.112-year-old papers and pictures that had disintegrated into nothing, all covered with a green goo. Hooray. At this point I started cracking up in my office, and the comments left on the video made me laugh harder. So many people, mostly alumni I think, were so mad that the university built up this whole thing, and it turned out to be full of moldy and tashayable paper. Luckily, the archivist knew what was put in the box originally, and spent the week scouring the archives for copies of the photographs and papers. So she kindly presented those to the audience, but the damage was done. I probably shouldn't find it as funny as I do, but the irony of it all made my day. Oh look, what a great piece of history. And it's nasty paper. Okay. Never mind. Pick of the unveiling. My one brother is a straight, no-nonsense type of guy who is about as stone-faced and stoic as one can get. At the time of this story, he's 24 and I'm 30. One night a few days before Christmas, I came home late, around 2 AM, to the family farm, and saw a light on out in the shop. Thinking someone forgot to turn it off, I head out to it, but as I approach, I hear power tools. So I step inside, and see the back of my brother's head on the other side of a tractor. He was still awake working on Christmas gifts. I close the shop door, and realize he probably didn't hear me coming due to the tools, because he didn't turn his head or anything. So I crouch, and approach from the opposite side of the tractor, staying behind the wheels, and wait. As soon as he turns off the tool he's using, I call his name using the scratchiest, most guttural voice I can muster. No reaction. After a couple seconds I wonder if he heard me, but then he comes around the side of the tractor. He's got a hammer raised in one hand, his eyes are the size of dinner plates, and his expression is one of abject fear. He then sees me, and we stare at each other for a second, before I burst out laughing, and he lowers hammer and flushes red. I'm laughing tears so hard that I fall into a chair, because I can't stand. Brother is just standing there glaring at me with his jaw set to one side with the okay, you got me look, and this just makes me laugh even harder. Took a few minutes to get it all out of my system. A half dozen of us are hanging out at night with a spray bottle filled with rubbing alcohol and a lighter. We each take turns spraying one hand and setting it on fire with the other. It looks really cool 10 or so seconds in the fire either runs out of fuel or a quick wave of the hand puts out the fire before it burns. One guy is manning a video camera and simply refuses to participate. This in itself is already funny because he fancies himself the tough guy of the group. After watching the video footage and the rest of us going on about how cool it was, he decides to do it. He doesn't listen to any advice we give him and soaks his hand and most of his forearm in more alcohol than the rest of us used combined. He lights it up and his arms from the elbow down bursts into a flame. It does look amazing. He strikes a menacing pose, his eyes widen, and the adrenaline rush he gets is obvious. Remember the part earlier where I said we all did it for about 10 seconds? He's so pumped He gets about 15 seconds and the pain hits him all at once. He starts hopping around and flailing his arms wildly while hooting and hollering. Instead of the fire going out instantly, flaming streams of alcohol just launch off his arms wildly into the night. A few seconds later he smothers the fire with this other rum and the rest of us are doubled over or rolling on the floor with laughter. We just couldn't stop laughing about for the rest of the night. A day later he accidentally lost the footage. Aside from his pride and his now hairless arm, he was uninjured. This joke. 3 guys are hiking through the woods. When they find a lamp, one of them picks it up, rubs it, and out pops a genie. It booms, "You have finally freed me after all these years, so I'll grant each one of you 3 wishes." The first guy immediately blurts out, "I want $1 billion. Poof. He's holding a printout that shows his account balance is now in fact 1,003,50. The second man thinks for a bit, then says, "I want to be the richest man alive." Poof. He's holding papers showing his net worth is now well over 100 billion. The third guy thinks even longer about his wish, then says, "I want my left arm to rotate clockwise for the rest of my life." Poof. His arm starts rotating. The genie tells them it's time for their second wish. First guy says, "I want to be married to the most beautiful woman on earth." Poof. A stunning beauty wraps herself around his arm. Second guy says, "I want to be good looking and charismatic, so I can have every girl I want." Poof. His looks change, and the first guy's wife immediately starts flirting with him. Third guy says, "I want my right arm to rotate counterclockwise until I die." Poof. Now both his arms are rotating in opposite directions. The genie tells them to think very carefully about their third wish. First guy does, and after a while says, "I never want to become sick or injured. I want to stay healthy until I die." Poof. His complexion improves, his acne is gone, and his knees don't bother him anymore. Second guy says, "I never want to grow old. I want to stay 29 forever." Poof. He looks younger already. Third guy smiles triumphantly and says, "My last wish is for my head to nod back and forth." Poof. He's now nodding his head and still flailing his arms around. The genie wishes them good luck, disappears, and the men soon go their separate ways. Many years later they meet again and chat about how things have been going. First guy is ecstatic. "I've invested the money and multiplied it many times over, so me and my family will be among the richest of the rich pretty much forever. My wife is a freak in the sheets, and I've never gotten so much as a cold in all these years." Second guy smiles and says, "Well, I built charities worldwide with a fraction of my wealth. I'm still the richest guy alive and also revered for my good deeds. I haven't aged a day since we last met, and yes, your wife is pretty wild in bed." Third guy walks in, flailing his arms around and nodding his head, and says, "Guys, I think I faked up. When I was 13 there was this girl named Chloe who kept kicking me in the bum. She wasn't even particularly higher in social status to me really. We were both a few steps above nerdy yet 20 steps away from popular. But she was in a different group from me and had some newfound confidence when she started dating this hot, albeit retrospectively icky, 17-year-old. She had turned into one of the nastiest ditch-a-dish girls I've ever met. Seriously. She would just randomly come up and kick me in the bum. No provocation. Nothing. I got tougher as high school progressed, but at that point I was miles away from ever engaging in a physical fight. She wasn't even worth it to me honestly. Meanwhile around the same time I had befriended a bunch of the really nerdy boys in my music class. They made me laugh, and I liked that they didn't care what people thought. Anyway, one of these boys was a little guy named Leslie. He was only 18 months younger than us all, had been skipped ahead a grade so was a foot shorter than everyone. Even his friends made fun of him. He was just so little. He was also a crier. He just couldn't keep the tears in when someone was mean. He never stood up to anyone to the point where I was like, "Leslie, you gotta stand up for yourself mate." Anyway, one day before class Chloe comes over and randomly kicks me in the bum. It hurt like hell, and I faking saw red. I turn around, and she's standing there laughing with her friend. Out of nowhere little Leslie came up from behind her like a little Energizer bunny and kicked her squarely up the ass. I'm 31 years old now. I will never in my lifetime laugh as much as I did in that moment. Little Leslie defended my honor. She never kicked me again by the way. This may be a you had to have been there moment lol, but I'm going to tell it anyway, because it was genuinely the hardest I've ever laughed. I was at my boyfriend's parents' house, and his parents were kind of complaining about how clumsy their son was to me. They were laughing about it, but they were genuine concerns. I was defending him, but secretly in agreement. Sometimes he hurts himself in the most ridiculous scenarios, never seriously, but if it happens, it's him. Anyways, the very next day my boyfriend borrows his dad's truck to go to Home Depot. They are carpenters, and he needed the truck to pick up wood. My boyfriend, after loading the bed of the truck, goes to step into the driver's side, somehow slips, goes to fall, and decides to grab the lights/turn signal stick, the most delicate thing on the car, to catch his fall and snaps it clean off. The car is now stuck with the left turn signal on. He gets home with the piece of stick in his pocket and proceeds to tell his parents what happened. They seem confused until he pulls the stick out from his pocket. His dad got so mad and his mom burst into howl laughs. I didn't want to. I really felt bad because it's a brand new truck, but I cried laughing. I did that scream laugh thing where you eventually cry and lose your breath. The more I laughed, the more his mom laughed. It went on forever. My boyfriend is also quiet and very sweet, so the way he told his dad was just so freaking funny. Poor guy. Anyways, it's been fixed, but his dad was really embarrassed to have to go in and have it fixed after just picking it up a month prior. When I was in university in the early 2000s, there was a popular challenge going around, drinking a gallon of whole milk in 1 hour. One afternoon, 2 guys decided to go head to head on this challenge. Suffice to say, each one had a different approach. The first guy, we'll call Sam. Sam was a pretty solid guy, football player, 5 minutes and 10 seconds, 220 pounds of muscle. Sam's strategy was to drink as much milk as quickly as possible and then spread the rest out through the hour. The second guy, we'll call Ryan. Ryan was 5 feet 2 inches and about 220 pounds of not muscle. Ryan had a different approach. His plan was to eat peanut butter sandwiches for an hour and wash them down with the milk at a slow and steady pace, with the idea that the sandwiches would absorb the milk and allow him to drink more. The clock started ticking and Sam, true to plan, quickly down at the first pint of milk. Ryan began to sip on his first glass of milk while eating his PB sandwiches. By the time Ryan had finished his first glass of milk, about 10 minutes, Sam had consumed about 1/2 gallon of milk. At this point, Sam began pacing around the room, hands on his hips, taking deep breaths. Ryan continued to chip away and finished his second glass. At about the halfway point, Sam was feeling good enough to try and chug another glass of milk, and so he did. After doing so, he wasn't feeling so great and immediately went over to a garbage can, hands on his knees, breathing heavily. All the while Ryan was continuing to sip on his milk and eat his PB sandwiches. After a few minutes, Sam began retch and eventually spew a mighty stream of milk into the garbage can. Ryan, ever the humanitarian and concerned for his friend's well-being, got up and walked over towards Sam. As he approached, he caught a whiff of vomit from the garbage can and dry heaved. After a couple more heaves, the last heave was not dry, and he began to throw up in the garbage can, which in turn caused Sam to vomit wave after wave of milky vomit into the garbage can. At this point, those in the room were beside themselves with laughter. Every detail was hilarious, from the juxtaposition of their physiques to how their strategies and behaviors during the challenge were so true to who they were. The sound of the two of them puking their guts out, both having utterly failed the challenge with 2 hopeless strategies, was, by far, the funniest thing I have ever witnessed, and I've never laughed so hard in my life. I was at Glade Festival, used to be a stage at Glastonbury, but branched off into its own thing. Played techno, pay trance, breakbeat. Now on the last day of the festival, the new bill criminalizing the sale, use and possession of magic mushrooms came into effect, so the stalls and sellers dropped the prices until at midnight. They were literally giving away free magic mushrooms. So we made the most of it. The funny bit was this glow stick war that was going on between some punters in the festival camping grounds and some crusties that had camped outside. One team had a count of 3, 2, 1 and simultaneously launched dozens of fistfuls of glow sticks over the fence. Then the other team would scurry round collecting them for a few minutes until you heard the 3, 2, 1 from the other team, and then a cascade of glow sticks rained down back on this side of the fence. I think pretty much everyone had taken advantage of the free mushrooms, but observing this spectacle of neon rain and the joy and the all-round atmosphere was just terrific. I ended up kneeling on the ground. A clump of grass was in each hand, howling and crying with unrestrained joy and laughter, tears pouring down my face. I can't quite believe it now, the amount of free psychedelics on offer, but it was more than people could eat. 3 friends and I went to this cave about a mile out of town. We made it to the cave at about 11 AM on a Tuesday, so nobody was there, a very rare occurrence at this cave. We took this chance to smoke some pot. We could hotbox in this enclosed part of the cave. We used our backpacks to block up the entrance and lit up. 2 guys only took a few puffs of a joint and left. They went deeper into the cave, while one friend and I smoked a few grams before moving on. Going through the cave became a challenge after that. We got some good laughs out of people banging their heads on the roof or tripping on rocks, but the funniest part was when we were out of the cave. The 2 friends who weren't high, or at least not very high, decided they were going to play a game with the one guy's car. One guy would stay on top and the other would drive around sporadically trying to knock the guy on top off. Watching this knocked my friend and I on ours laughing. The guy on top screaming, the crappy Subaru bouncing around on the uneven desert ground. Killed me especially. I don't smoke as often as my friend, so I have little to no tolerance. So that probably made it funnier than it really was. If I was sober, I'd probably be scared the guy on top was going to die. TLDR, watched a guy try to knock another guy off his car while I was high AF. Earlier this year, I was dicking around on YouTube at home as I was pre-gaming on a Friday night, before I was going to go out to the bars. I watch one of those stupid Vine compilations and find a clip in there of what turns out to be a line from Brandon Rogers' Angry Office. Realizing that has to be from something, I look that up and find his channel. I had seen him in passing on YouTube and that Try Me, Beach meme, but never actually watched his stuff before. Long story short, it is the funniest shit I have ever seen, and I proceed to binge about 30 of his videos over the course of about 3 to 4 hours, while having about as many homemade screwdrivers in the process. Everything is getting funnier as I get drunker, and no, I didn't make it out that night. Zero regrets. Fast forward to the end of this, and I find Darlene is spiritual. I'm so far gone that the opening line makes me laugh for about 5 minutes straight, so I knew this was a good one. Every damn line makes me laugh to the point where I have to pause it because I'm laughing so hard I can't hear. Then we get to the character arc C, described as Setch addict, likes pink. The delivery of her line, the pacing and timing in the video, and the fact that the joke is astoundingly funny, combined with my high as fuck back means that when I hear that joke, I instantly lost it and laughed uncontrollably for about 43 minutes straight and couldn't get composure of myself at that time either. Fell out of my chair and just laid on the floor and laughed like a freaking psych ward patient. Funniest thing I've ever heard, and it still gets me every time. Just over a decade ago I took a ballroom dance class at UAF. I had messed up my knee, and that leg was still recovering. I also didn't have a car, was walking everywhere, and nowhere was less than an hour. Ever been to Fairbanks in winter? It's a bit chilly. I needed some laughs. Anyway, shortage of guys in the class, so this guy, Travis, that worked that time of day would join us, and we'd get partnered a few times a class. Travis was great, always making me laugh, putting me at easy TC point to stand out. He had a cold. In ballroom dance the girl, me, puts her hand on the guy's shoulder. He did a weird cross-knees combo. He's a considerate kind of guy, so to avoid doing it into my face he does it into his shoulder. The one with my hand. We both stop dead and look at his shoulder / my hand in disgust, then at each other, and bust out laughing. I'm not very coordinated and my bum knee didn't help. We are trying to learn some cha-cha move. It did not go well. I don't remember what we were supposed to do, but I failed miserably. Left leg forward, I leaned forward, weight on L leg, tried to tap that foot, leaned back onto bum O leg that didn't bend, tried to tap L foot, weight back to L left, repeat. Very stiff and jerky. Several times in a row like record skipping. This polite, always something kind to say guy stops dead, looks me straight in the eye and says, "What the hell was that? What was it?" We both just started laughing. Matt, the usually pretty chill teacher, had to separate us for the rest of class because we couldn't even look at each other without laughing. Writing these out, I realize they probably sound pretty lame, but at the time, I miss that guy. I should have found a way to hang out with him outside of class. Here I'm late to the thread, but here goes. I live in a state where certain things are legal, and sometimes those things are put into candy bars. I had a friend visiting from Australia, and she bought one of those candy bars on our night out. The plan was to go to a sketch comedy show, and then out to a bar. The thing about those candy bars is they are very hard to gauge how much is enough or too much. We had 2 pieces each, felt nothing, so said screw it, and went for a third. Anyone who has tried this before knows where this is going. I felt completely fine for the first half of the show. The sketches were kind of lame. The stage was very simple, and it was mainly friends of friends packed into this tiny theater. Then the ultimate sketch happened. Basically, a couple is walking on a street and another person ran up to them and said, "Give me all your money." The couple, terrified, hands him their bags, and then the man hands them a mug and yells, "You've been mugged." I lost my shit. I was laughing so hard, I kept patting my pants to make sure I wasn't peeing myself. I was convinced I was peeing myself. Violent, earth-quivering, hysterical laughter. The actors on stage loved it, and you could tell improvised more to keep the laughter going. I was just sobbing and howling. My stomach hurt. Everyone around me was cracking up from my laughter, and it just kept going. I had started to calm down when my friend just got up without a word and left. The show went on until I got a text from said friend who said she was in an Uber because she just couldn't handle it. I started laughing hysterically again. No context. People probably knew I had had too much chocolate. Thank God we had another person with us that was okay. I only have one photo from the night. Here it is, but it perfectly sums up how I felt. This is after the show was long ended, the mug was put away, and we were calling our own Uber. I was in a quiet lobby trying to calm down. Spoiler alert, I couldn't. And to this day my friend will occasionally text me, "I've been mugged," and I chuckle. I swear I grew abs that night. Playing MTG at non-casual Friday Night Magic. You know, the normal weekly thing, where it's usually standard, maybe modern once every month or so. Playing against a friend, roommate at the time, who had this fucking shit-eating grin ever since we found we'd play first. I had never actually gotten to play against him at Friday Night Magic, just at home, so I was excited for a non-casual match, and assumed he was too. And it was modern this week. Oh boy. Turns out he's playing a blue artifact deck, and all he's doing is just drawing cards left and right and spewing nonsense defensive large but artifact creatures and islands into play. I'm sitting here playing my red/white/blue control deck, holding up mana for counters, since I have no fucking idea what he's doing at all, and not drawing my win conditions or board clears to get rid of whatever the plan is for all these wieners with 0 power. Gets to like turn 10 to 15, and he has no cards in hand, and is getting mana flooded, so I figure fuck it, let's play a big dude. Slam down an Inferno Titan, basically a guy that can win on his own for you non-magic playing people, leaving up enough mana to counter whatever spell he draws next turn and putting a clock on this motherfucker's shenanigans. Pass priority to end my turn, thinking I've won, before the end of your turn. Motherfucker. He has one of these fakers jammed in every single sleeve under the cards. Untap. Combat. Obviously gets disqualified, but not before every single person in the store comes to see what the fuck is going on, since we are literally falling out of our chairs in laughter. Honorable mentions to Dumb and Dumber, which I saw when I was about 8, and the episode of the It Crowd called The Haunting of Bill Krause, which both made me cry with laughter. When I was about 13, my late uncle told me what is still my favorite joke of all time. I've retold it so many times and tweaked it to make it my own. that I don't remember exactly how he told it, except the premise and the punchline, but I'll tell a basic version of it. A guy runs out of petrol at dusk in the middle of nowhere and finds himself walking into a strange motel hoping to get a cheap room. He walks up to the desk and is greeted with a friendly hello by the staff member. "Hello to you too. I'm hoping to get a room for the night. I've ran out of petrol and it's a fair hike to the nearest station." The staff member taps on his computer and suggests a room and a price. "No, that's too expensive. I have this much." He shows the man a handful of loose cash. The man frowns. "We do have a room in your price range, but it's not one we usually rent out. There's a rather specific rule about the room." "Fine, whatever, I'll take it." The man turns and takes a key off the wall behind him. "It's yours for the night. Just don't touch the pink bear." "The what?" "The pink bear. Just don't touch it and you'll be fine." Thinking that he's dealing with a crazy man, our hero nods politely and heads towards the rooms. He walks all the way to the end before he finds the right door, which he promptly opens. Inside is the most bare basic room he'd ever seen. A single bed, a toilet and a wash basin. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for one extremely strange thing. Up one corner of the room were thick metal bars forming a sort of cage, and in that cage was a small bear cub, covered in bright pink fur. It was facing away from him. He had the impulse to walk right up to it and touch it immediately, but didn't. Shrugging, he took off his boots and collapsed in the bed. After a short while, he woke in a cold sweat. He'd been dreaming a crazy dream and he looked across at the bear, which hadn't moved. He walked over the cage. He could easily reach his arm through the bars and touch the bear. He shook his head and went back to lie down. Again, after a short time he awoke in sheer panic. He jumped up and went over to the cage. The bear had not moved or made any indication that it even knew he was there. He reached his arm through and was just about to touch it when he pulled back. "No." He told himself, "I can't touch it. There's a rule for a reason." He laid back down and went back to sleep. After a slightly longer amount of time, he woke with a shriek, blind terror filling him. He rushed over and touched the pink bear, the impulse finally getting the better of him. The moment his finger touched its soft fur, things happened very quickly. It made a sort of ugh sound, as though disappointed, turned and began very quickly to grow to twice, thrice and then quadruple its original size. Wicked long claws grew from its fingers and gripped the bars, ripping them apart. The man promptly pissed all over himself and turned and ran. He stomped down the hallway toward the front desk, the sound of the bear chasing him close behind. He got to the desk and the staff member looked confused. Before he could finish his sentence, the bear came flying towards them, smashing the desk and its occupant across the room where they landed in a pile of broken wood and flesh. He got out the door and into his car with the speed only someone truly running for their lives can do. Trapped in his car, he realized he had no keys and no fuel. He had basically made a sardine out of himself. The bear, sensing an end to its chase, stalked close to him, reaching down and peeling the roof of the car off. It reached down and poked him with one of its razor-sharp claws. "You're it." Does maniacal, slightly unhinged laughter count? I was trapped in an abusive, manipulative relationship for 4 years. One of the biggest sources of conflict was the late night calls. He wanted me to stay up and talk with him on the phone until 3 or 4 AM almost every night of the week. But he didn't actually want me to talk with him. He wanted me to sit completely quietly and listen while he droned on and on with anecdotes about his life and experiences. If I spoke, I would ruin his train of thought and start a bout of furious screaming from him. When he got angry, which was almost every day, he would scream into the phone so loudly I couldn't even understand what he was saying most of the time. If I fell asleep, that meant I didn't love and respect him enough to stay awake. Sorry, this is a wall of text, but it's relevant. Anyway, fast forward 3 years from our breakup, and I start dating the man who would become my husband. This is the first relationship I had after the abusive one that I took seriously. I really wanted this to be the one that worked out. So one night he and I were up late talking, probably 1 or 2 AM, and I fell asleep in the middle of the conversation. When I woke up to my alarm, my stomach dropped. I completely devolved into a panic attack and called him to apologize. My boyfriend didn't answer because he was asleep, and I left this long, rambling, sobbing message of apology before I went to work. I spent the first hour of work just utterly devastated. We'd only been dating a week, and I just knew I had ruined it. Then he showed up to my work and asked if he could talk to me outside. I was shaking and felt like I was going to throw up, but I followed him out into the parking lot. But he only wanted to know what had upset me so much. The way I talked in the message had scared the shit out of him enough that he drove to my work on his day off just to talk to me in person. Not only was he not mad about me falling asleep on him, but he couldn't figure out what was so bad or wrong about me doing it in the first place. He laughed and the realization that I'd overreacted hit me, so I tried to laugh too. Then the laugh sort of took control of me, and I doubled over belly laughing until my chest hurt. I didn't know that stupid shit from TV shows and movies actually happened. Laughing and laughing until suddenly you were sobbing instead. I laughed until my throat was raw and tears were falling down my face, and then I cried for just as long. My poor, brand new boyfriend held me once he realized I was crying and sort of patted my head a lot and tried to be calming. I honestly don't know how that whole 24 hours of our dating experience didn't convince him to turn tail and run. He stuck around though, and we celebrate 5 years together this month, 3 years married this December. TLDR, I laughed until I couldn't breathe and then cried until I nearly threw up when I realized my current boyfriend wasn't an abusive manipulative bastard like my ex. Glad he eventually married this crazy woman, me. I should preface this by saying I used to do improv comedy, and it was awesome. I have a ton of stories from improv, but this is by far my favorite. We were doing a game of stand sit kneel. One person has to be doing each action as the scene goes on and justify why they're doing it. The scene was that one of us was about to give birth, which ended up being me, and we took it from there. After a few hectic minutes on stage, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Immediately after, just as we are taking a second to breathe, my friend Adam, who's holding the baby, goes and he's peeing on me. Everyone laughs, and it feels like the scene is about to wrap, but then the third person in the scene, Lauren, tries to suddenly step back out of the way of the pee. Apparently, she moved too quickly for her own good, and tripped over her own feet. There was a green chalkboard on wheels that we always used to show our troops logo / the show theme in the background, and it wasn't the steadiest thing I've seen. Lauren bumps up against the chalkboard, tries to catch herself on it, and accidentally pulls it down on top of her. She was okay. Now, normally I don't like laughing at what's happening on stage, unless it's in character for me, but this was too much. I curled up into a ball and started laughing so hard that tears were rolling down my face, and I couldn't breathe for a solid 20 seconds. We ended the scene there. We don't use the chalkboard anymore. My mom is a psycho, so anything that screws her over is fodder for laughing to tears fits. She totally loses it. Example, one time she dragged us food shopping as kids, and she lost her footing going down a hill. The ugly old lady cart she was pushing fell too. Food went flying. Instead of checking for injuries, she yells, "My milk. Get the faking thing." It was a gallon, tumbling full speed down the street. My sis fetches it, and it's basically empty and the plastic bag is shredded. My mom yelled a bunch of expletives, her favorite way to communicate. Mom buys a cheap caller ID from some Asian country at the dollar store and can't fix it. The gadget kept giving her the date, and after like 6 times of trying to set it up she yells, "No kidding, it's April 27th, you motherless bastard." Mom gets caught out in the rain all the time. This time she remembers her umbrella. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The expensive umbrella she had broke, and she was drenched. Since she still has a moral conscience, she didn't just chuck it on the street, she carried it until she found a garbage can, her resentment growing. When she locates one, she beat it against the edges, cursing of course, and all these rich people, Upper Manhattan, were staring at her. One time she was excited to get new curtains. She gets on a kitchen chair to hang them, something she hates doing, because she thinks it's too high, and she's wobbling around. The disaster isn't what you think it is. She didn't fall, but she couldn't get the rod back in place. After 20 minutes, and almost in tears of rage, she gives up. I casually suggest she get a new rod because you can't help her and can't laugh. She agrees, gets off the chair and yells at the rod, "Now that you ruined my day, I'm going to ruin yours." She proceeded to beat it against the windowsill before throwing it away. The dent is still in the paint, 13 years later. I actually caught it and managed to post it to YouTube. I was playing Black Ops 3 with my friends. This was about 3 years ago, and we were warming up to play competitively. We were trying to practice a specific movement mechanic on one part of this one map for usage in future competitive games. Now, there was this mechanic in that game where you could run on walls, and that's what this specific route involved. However, if you were running on a wall and got hit by a stun grenade / shock charge, you'd fall off of the wall. Normally this isn't a big deal, as you'll just land on the ground, but for this specific route, the wall is technically off the map. I got this sadistic idea to mess with my friends for fun. I equipped a class with shock charges only and ran over to the wall and started knocking them off the wall, making them fall to their death. At this point, I'm already laughing pretty hard, but they're catching on, so I have to wait before resuming my strategy. I finally knock my friend off when he was really trying to get a legit attempt at it, and he curses at me. At this point I'm laughing really hard. I see him respawn on the map, and while I'm still laughing, I see him come running towards me, and I'm thinking, oh, he's gonna try and kill me so he can get a good run. Nope. He runs directly by me and jumps on the wall again, not expecting me to knock him off again. The visual of him running right by me onto the wall made it so that I couldn't stop laughing, and I threw a shock charge. I knocked him off the wall, and since I had already been laughing so hard already, this basically killed me. I couldn't breathe at all due to the prior laughter. I eventually take a massive gasp for air, but for a couple seconds, you can't hear any audio from my end, because I'm literally laughing so hard I ran out of air. Here's the video. Skip to 120. When I was 14, my friends and I would always go to the house of us, the richest one of us, that had a whole basement apartment for himself, and watch movies, play video games, eat cheat food, etc. The usual, I guess. We were always with the three of us, but at a certain point, we bought a deep fryer. Things started to change dramatically. Some other boys from school heard of it, and immediately, there were almost 10 people every day. This changed the dynamic in such a way that everyone got a bit more cocky, as if someone had to become the alpha male. The worst, or actually the best, night was when someone brought a blow-up killer whale with him, and every one of the 10 boys, except for the old gang of 3, started to act as if they were group faking the poor plastic soul. I think that my 14-year-old brain started to lay its foundation for the incoming giggles. After this horrific scene, we went to watch a movie, all covered in greasy fried snacks. We got the movie at the local rent house, my Netflix youngins. This Scandinavian movie started in a church, and there was a weird ceremony and a guy sniffing coke in the bathroom. The guy comes out, and all of a sudden, due to some sort of zombie outbreak, everybody has to stay inside. Of course, the zombies break in, and the whole movie revolves around the coke guy trying to escape the zombies. But these zombies were the worst zombies I've ever seen. One of them had an amputated leg, and I swear until my last day on earth, they just wrapped a big bologna against his leg. After seeing that, I think the neighbors thought we were dying, because the 10 of us lost breath whilst yelling and throwing that poor killer whale against the wall. Total madness. I think that was the first time I got high, because choking on my own laughter made hallucinate like crazy. The only thing I was seeing was zombie rabbits that were wearing the skins of other rabbits while I was maniacally laughing. Sometimes I wish I still knew the title of that movie, but to keep the dream of the moment alive, maybe it's better this way. I worked the breakfast and lunch shifts at a summer camp kitchen when I was 18. I'm not talking the kind of kitchen that reheats canned sloppy joes 5 meals a week. We made damn near everything from scratch, and most of the produce was local. Easily the best 3 months I've spent, starting my day at 5:30 a.m. Half of the kitchen staff was Hispanic, and while most spoke some English, it was choppy at best. I spoke enough Spanish to hold conversations with them and translate when I could, but we generally relied on George, the one Colombian who was fluent in both. George's fiancée, Julie, also worked in the kitchen and arguably had the hardest time with English out of all of them. She could speak and understand simple sentences well enough, but like the rest of us, she leaned on George to fill in the blanks. On the first day, we met up to go over kitchen safety rules, cleaning procedures, and all other sorts of commercial kitchen know-how. George is quietly whispering intermittent translations to Julie and the other staff. Before long, we reach the safety portion, where we are told to loudly say, sharp, hot, or corner, whenever we are carrying something sharp, hot, or we are rounding a blind corner. George translates, Julie and the rest of the Hispanic staff nod in delayed assent, and we move on. The next day, Julie, George, and I are working the lunch shift. I was chopping through a mountain of cilantro when I hear Julie's voice from mere feet behind me, yelling, shark. Startled, I look behind me and see Julie, safely, carrying an 8-inch chef's knife, bellowing shark, loudly enough for the entire kitchen to hear, over and over again. I looked over at George and asked, did she just say shark? George smiled, nodded, and put a finger to his lips as if to say, yes, but don't tell her. 10-4. We managed to let this go for about a week. Every time Julie yelled shark, we'd lock eyes, alarm the office, and fight the oncoming laughter. One day, Julie yelled shark more times in 3 seconds than I thought was humanly possible. We couldn't keep it in anymore. George and I fell to our knees laughing. She looked at us, confused, and asked what was so funny. George, amidst his giggles, told her that she was saying the English word for tiburon. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates, her face blushed, and her hand made a quick detour to cover her mouth in embarrassment, before curling into a fist making swift contact with George's shoulder. It didn't matter. George kept laughing. I kept laughing. Before long, Julie was laughing. The best part of this story is that Julie didn't let this stop her. She kept saying shark instead of sharp for the entire summer, and before long the rest of the kitchen staff were saying it too. This took place about 7 years ago, and I still laugh about it. A friend from my hometown moved away to Switzerland for grad school. It's there where she met her current, long-term so, we'll call him Seamus. Now Seamus was born in Switzerland, but went to school in Ireland as a boy, and studied through to adulthood. Needless to say he picked up the accent, and could speak Gaelic and several other languages as well. Because my friend lived overseas, visitations were and are often sparse. But the few times she did visit she would call our mutual friends months in advance, and we'd plan a get together during her stay. The first time I was introduced to Seamus in person was at one of these parties. All of our friends were curious about him, since they had never known anyone from his part of the world. But the one thing no one could get over was his Irish accent. Bless this man, for he knew not what company he kept. The evening goes on and Seamus and I get to talk for a bit. I ask him how things were going, and other mundane things like, what are your favorite childhood breakfast cereals? Mine was Lucky Charms. What's Lucky Charms? He asked. I proceed to tell him all about the cereal and its leprechaun mascot, Lucky. And Lucky has this special catchphrase. I tell him exactly how to say it, inflections and all. It's at this point everyone has gathered round, waiting. Say the line. Seamus, I say. He yells. They're after me, Lucky Charms. 11 adults are on the floor, laughing breathlessly. We cannot stand from how hard we are laughing. I had to stop several times while writing this just to laugh. I still laugh to this day. I actually still laugh about this now every time I think of it. In my hometown there's this big busy street where typically all the pubs, restaurants etc. point are. Obviously, this means all the drunks and the like congregate there on a daily basis. Anyways, this one day I'm walking back home up this very street and I see these two very drunk guys larking about, pushing each other, being generally obnoxious but harmless. Guy 1 is dancing around, while guy 2 is walking backwards, checking out the people walking past, and swearing at his friend. He comes to a small island sort of thing in the middle of the road and I can already feel my laughter brewing, because I know what's about to happen. My dad's with me, and rolling his eyes, because he knows what's going to happen too, and what I'm thinking. Sure enough, No sooner does the thought enter my head than guy 2 falls over the raised curb/island thing, taking out a traffic cone with his legs coming to rest somewhere over his left should. I've completely lost it at this point and had to hide my face in the folds of my hoodie to hide my laughter. I can't breathe, and my dad remaining stoic next to me is making it worse. Then a group of homeless guys sitting on a low wall start laughing. Proper loud belly laughs like the sort that physically hurt and I can't hold it any longer. I laugh for so long and so hard that I feel vaguely sick afterwards. It wasn't really that funny in hindsight. Lies, it was hilarious. It's just the thought of this guy's legs going up in the air, traffic cone squished underneath him, that gets me going every time. We were about 16 or 17 when a friend bragged that he didn't feel anything whenever he used mentholatum, aka DPEAT, a cream that relieves muscle pain but gives a strange icy burning sensation when applied to skin. We didn't believe him, so we dared him to apply some to his balls. Even better, the exact product we found for him to use wasn't actually DPEAT, but was a stronger variant used on horses. We pooled together about $20 all up to pay him if he went through with the dare. This dude, confident as anything, just straight on all ducks it in front of us, dips his fingers in the cream, and slathers it on his nuts. Stands there, cocky as anything for about a minute or two, loudly bragging about how he doesn't feel a thing and we're all pussies, etc. before he suddenly went quiet. We all started to crack grins, and in the silence we heard him softly whisper, "Oh no." His face started contorting, and almost right away I was on the damn floor laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. He started flailing and screeching and running around in a circle. The rest of us were complete wrecks, just crying and laughing and rolling on the floor. After a few seconds he remembered there was a pool in the backyard, so he ran outside, still naked from the waist down, and jumped in. We couldn't even follow him outside, we were in such a state. Apparently it didn't offer him much relief, and we still found him sitting in the pool minutes later when we finally made it outside. He had tears in his eyes. He did win $20 though, so after he got over the pain he was pretty happy. Usually I laugh at anything and everything, and one of the times I've laughed the hardest is when my two best friends and I were going to prepare dinner. So it was going to be my friend's, let's call him K, birthday at midnight, and around 10 PM all of us realized we wouldn't be able to go out, since this was around the time when finals are happening and we needed to do good, final year in college, etc. So my other friend, let's call him C, and I decide to cook dinner for my friend and celebrate the birthday. Around 11:30 we all gather up and we check out some roasted chicken that we had going in the oven. Unknown to me, C had bought the nicest and softest French baguette that he intended to use to make the sandwich. I, being hungry and impatient, got out some good old wheat bread and decided to make my own sandwich. Therefore, while C was heating up the baguette in the oven after the chicken was done, I proceeded to cut out 2 thick slices of the chicken and got my sandwich all ready to go. At this point, C gets the baguette out and starts making the sandwiches for all 3 of us. So I tell him not to bother with mine, since I already got it ready. He looks at my plain bread with disgust and says, "Dude, you had to be premature, didn't you?" K falls down laughing at this. We don't quite get why he's cracking up so much about C admonishing me with my haste in making the sandwich. Between fits of laughter, K tells C and I how he thought C was saying I was born a couple of months premature and don't have a fully developed brain, which is why I couldn't wait for that baguette to be ready. When we hear this, we also burst out laughing. We are crying from laughter, and every time we try to take a bite of our sandwiches, one of us will burst out laughing, setting us all off, making it near impossible to finish that sandwich. All this time, another of our roommates is upstairs with his girl trying to have sex, and he can't concentrate because of our laughter. So he comes down to silence us, and seeing us on the verge of wetting our pants, starts laughing himself and intrigued, asks us why we were cracking up. We are too disoriented to tell the story, so while he's waiting his girlfriend storms out of the house because she can't stand us cackling like hyenas, which only makes us howl harder. The nonsense started around 11:50 and didn't end till 12:30 AM. Best birthday present we could ever give K. My partner and I had just finished moving and were too tired to make dinner, so we decided to get some fast food and call it a night. I had never been to the nearest fast food place before, so decided to look up the menu before going because I hate being that person sitting trying to decide in the drive-thru. After some looking around, I decide I would like their fiery Angus burger. I make an immature joke about how it sounds like a fiery anus, we have a giggle, make a few more lame jokes about it, and then head out. I get to the drive-thru, and in my tired just moved haze I accidentally order a large fiery anus. The moment it comes out of my mouth I realize what I've said, and immediately start shouting Angus, Angus, and hear a snort from the person through the microphone and a breathless please drive to the next window. At this point I'm mortified, but losing it simultaneously, and my partner is in the passenger seat dying. I'm literally crying and trying to breathe past the laughter, and we can hear laughter inside. The girl serving us was very professional, however as she was taking payment, which I used my card for, she had to walk away to compose herself. All the employees avoided any eye contact until we left, trying their best to keep their composure, which I commend them for. It can't have been easy, because we were sitting there literally tears streaming down our eyes. If someone didn't know it was laughter they would have called an ambulance, because we were red in the face and not breathing. We laughed for probably a good hour or so after we got home, and I'm sure we made every worker's night. I was up at my friend's cabin for the 4th of July with his family and some buddies, and we were boating over to a fireworks show on the lake. Once we got to a close spot, my friend's dad driving the boat says, "This looks good, why don't you drop the anchor and D?" My friend clearly had never done this before. It was his uncle's boat and his parents were also kind of new to boating. He looks back at us still hesitating and asks us, so I just drop this thing. Myself and our other 2 friends are in the boat like, "Dude, it's an anchor, just throw it overboard." There's a little sense of urgency too because we're starting to drift into other boats. Eventually my friend says, "Alright, here goes nothing," and emphatically yells anchors away for some reason. He throws the thing overboard, and we all watch silently as the anchor line quickly unravels off the deck until there's only a few feet left, and the final piece of rope slips out of the boat and into the lake. Apparently it wasn't tied to the boat at all. I think it was the natural setup and delivery of this accident that made it so funny, because I've never laughed harder in my life. My friend's parents were visibly upset, and he was still confused how he managed to fuck that up, despite all his precautions. And my friends and I were on the floor of this pontoon laughing uncontrollably. We called him Anchors Away Andy for the rest of the summer. Also, we learned later we were in over a 100 foot of water, so the anchor wouldn't have hit bottom anyways. I left chemical class in high school to go #2. I was on the throne in a bathroom with 2 toilet stalls and was minding my business while doing my business when I noticed that another kid from my chemical class was in the stall to my left. I knew this because he was the only kid in our grade that wore sweet pants and those dad cutting the lawn kind of Nikes. He was an Asian kid, really nice, well liked, and the smartest kid in the whole school by a large margin, but he was also a bit shy. Well anyways, this dude lets out a colossal 2-second ball-shattering fetched. I raised my eyebrows and was grinning and laughing silently, but then he just kept going, like ripping a piece of construction paper mixed with thunder types of fetcheds. He let 4 or 5 of those go and eventually I just lost it and started laughing out loud in the quiet bathroom. I couldn't help it at all. I was wheezing and throwing my head back. I laughed until tears started welling up in my eyes and then knew I had to shut up and leave before he got out because he was already a shy kid and I didn't want him to be even more embarrassed by finding out the kid laughing at him was someone who knew him. So I left the bathroom without washing my hands and somehow kept a stone face when he rejoined me a minute later looking sweaty and red in the face. Long build up, but here it is. Few years ago I was 18 and my flight out of Boston airport got cancelled and I was stuck there alone having to stay the night. Luckily I was flying cross country to see my grandfather who is rather well off, so when he heard of my predicament he insisted to get me a hotel room for the night at a place that turned out to be pretty damn nice, like $300 a night and on the 22nd floor. This same night, by complete coincidence, some of my high school age friends from rural New Hampshire decided to drive down to Boston, just for the hell of it. So when I found out, of course I had to invite them over. They're mostly idiots and not used to being in a nice hotel, so they think everything is amazing. They get there around 11 PM, and before they even find my room they pressed all the buttons in the elevator and stole an entire bowl of mints from the reception desk. Now this hotel is one of those where they deliver overpriced food to your room on a fancy tray, and you just leave it outside when you're done until cleaning comes by later and takes it away. As I'm leading my friends out of the hotel, they decide they're hungry and are now running down the hall scavenging people's leftover food and mostly empty drinks off of these trays on the ground. I'm trying to get them to stop, but at the same time, I'm almost dying of laughter about how dumb and out of place they look doing this, and eventually let them fill up for a few minutes while trying to hold back tears and catch my breath. I also had to tell them that, even though there was no sign, they can't skateboard down the halls. I finally got them out, and then we had one of the most fun nights of our lives walking around the financial district until 3 AM skateboarding and doing parkour. I later told one of my friend's mom about her son stealing random hotel guests' leftovers off the ground, and she almost died of laughter too. TLDR, watching my friends be complete idiots in a really fancy hotel. Years ago, my husband and I just got back from a movie. We are sitting in the truck in our driveway. It's winter, about 19 degrees outside, and being a herbal smoker, hubby convinced me to partake with him. Needless to say, I got really stoned. I'm not a smoker. Anyway, hubby asks me to sit with him while he smokes the last cigarette for the night. At this point he's already shut off the ignition, but we have our jackets on, so should be okay in the 10 minutes it will take for him to smoke. Last thing I recall is him looking at me with an lit cigarette in his mouth. At that point I guess I just kinda zone out as I'm high AF. I don't know how much time had passed by. It seems like I've been zoned out for hours, though I know that's just the pot. I was just sitting, looking out my window, thinking but zoned out. Slowly I start to realize it's getting pretty cold. I can clearly remember thinking, man, I'm really starting to get cold. Geez, what the fuck is taking so long to smoke one faking cigarette? Like it's got to have been over 20 minutes at least, right? I don't even smell the smoke. Am I that high? Oh my god, maybe he already smoked and is waiting on me. To this day I can't even tell this part of the story without cracking up. Yes, I'm laughing as I type this. The memory is still so funny to me. Anyway, I simultaneously ask if he's done and turn to look at him. He turns to look at me with an lit cigarette still in his mouth, but in a fast, playful way. Almost like, what ya doing? The cigarette is pointing upwards, and he has this derpy look on his face. I realize that, like me, he's been sitting, looking out his window, and zoned out the entire freaking time that I've been waiting on him. That look, the fact that he forgot about the lit cig in his mouth, forgot that we were sitting here, forgot he was supposed to be smoking, and how my dumbass had been waiting while he smoked, had me in hysterics. Could not breathe from laughing. It in turn got him laughing. So he's cracking up over me cracking up, but he has no idea why I'm cracking up, which is also making me crack up even more. I can't even get out why I was laughing to begin with. I try to stop and calm down, but the second I started to think of the situation, of us both being so high that we forgot everything, and him laughing because of me laughing at him, made it impossible to get 2 words out. We were both in tears, doubled over with the type of deep laughter that's also silent, for lack of a better word. This went on for a good 15 minutes. I felt like I pulled something in my ribs, stomach and lower back from laughing so hard. I somehow managed to not piss my pants, but I felt that soreness for days. The most intense laugh I ever had happened a few years ago. I was hanging out at my good friend's house down the street, shooting the shit, and generally taking in a slow afternoon. At some point, his older sister decides to sit down nearby and turn on the TV to some knockoff Ancient Aliens show. Now my friend and I have openly mocked those shows before, so our conversation drifts to talking crap about things in the show, and mocking her tastes. We end up blasting through the first part of the episode, already starting to crack up. After the commercial break, the show opened up to the world's most terribly generic CGI rendering of some aliens presumably looking over the camera's body under an operating room light. The show then cuts to some hokey theory about how the chambers of the Great Pyramids were used as some internal hydroelectric generator to power some electromagnetic beacon that shot out of the pyramid into space to signal the aliens, or calling for Gonda's aid as my friend put it. That broke me. At the beginning of that segment, I had already stopped laughing and was just listening incredulously to what the show was saying. As the process was unveiled, I was completely stunned at the words I was hearing from the speakers. When the beacon shot out, everything fell apart, and I ended up laughing at least 15 minutes straight. The show had broken me beyond plain mockery. I was laughing so hard, and for so long that controlling my laughter was necessary, just so I could take a proper breath. I ended up deciding that nothing could top hydroelectromagnetic pyramid beacons in sheer comedic value. It has become the ultimate inside joke for my circle of friends as we told them of the truth. Another friend of mine, and I even got an anthropology professor and a geology/meteorology professor to roll with it when we told them about the myth of the hydroelectromagnetic pyramids while on a trip for the solar eclipse last year. I wish I could find that episode, or at least that specific segment, of Knockoff Ancient Aliens. I haven't found it on YouTube after all these years. There has to be a recording of it floating somewhere. All I know for sure is that it was definitely not Ancient Aliens on the History channel, but some knockoff from another channel. I had a group of friends at school who all hung out with each other during break times. There were maybe 10 of us. We were all connected by having at least one friend that we were close with. Not everyone got along with each other, but we had enough people that we liked overall to put up with the people we didn't like. One of the things we did during our breaks was play football, soccer, emoji. We have W and we have D. They couldn't stand each other, but they both weren't popular in general, so if they didn't have this group, they would essentially be on their own. We are playing football in our little corner. Some of us are eating our lunches, so there's only 3 or 4 of us playing. W has the ball under his foot, thinking about what he wants to do next. He's posing somewhat, trying to look cool, Beckham-esque, aiming an imaginary free kick towards an imaginary goal. D, who is behind W, is annoyed at how long W is taking, so he decides to kick the ball for him. But it turns out that W was quite firm with his foot placement. D kicked the ball so damn hard that W fell backward flat on his back. He let out a whoa as he went. Picture Yoda yelling "concentrate" with his wide eyes before falling. This was the equivalent. The fall was funny enough, but the yell that W let out absolutely killed me. I'm nearly in tears thinking about it now. I was in tears when it happened. I laughed like I've never laughed before. Uncontrollable belly laughter that had me hunched over with my hands on my knees just to keep myself from falling over. The kind of laugh that made everyone else laugh because of how infectious it was. I must have been laughing for at least a couple of minutes straight. I'm also somebody that doesn't laugh out loud a lot unless I'm caught completely by surprise. I'm more of a smirker or a quick giggler. So yeah, it was pretty funny. I miss that social circle. School was funner than I gave it credit for at the time. This happened when I was about 10-year-old and my friend was about 9-year-old. I was fairly tall for my age and my friend has always been quite short. This matters later. We were playing in her front garden and then decided to go visit her elderly neighbor. We'll call her Val, who was a sweet lady who used to make us lemonade and tell us stories, etc. It wasn't uncommon for us to go visit her and see how she was as she lived alone. So we get to Val's front door and I could see through the window into the lounge. I could see a man sitting in Val's chair and no sign of Val, which I thought was strange, so I told my friend that there is a man. She couldn't see through the window as it was above her eye level. She didn't believe me and thought I was joking, trying to freak her out or something. I insisted that I wasn't joking and that there really is a man. I even offered to lift her up at the window so she could see, but she refused as she hated being small and being picked up and stuff. So I had another look in the window and I'm like, he's creepy looking, let's go, and my friend still doesn't believe me. So she knocked on the door and I see the man get up and make his way to the front door. I decided at this point I was too scared to stick around, so I noped out and ran off around the corner of the house, closer towards my friend's house, where the guy couldn't see me, but I could peek out and see the front door. I see the door open, and as soon as my friend sees the man she lets out a deafening, high-pitched scream at the sight of him. The poor guy looks so startled and asks her what she wants, and she just says I'm sorry. I scream at everyone I meet for the first time as a feeble explanation, and then she ran off to join me. The guy looked dumbfounded and shut the door. We then ran back to her house and we laughed so hard we couldn't breathe. She really thought I was just making it up about there being a man, and when he answered the door, he was a bit creepy looking. She was so shocked she couldn't help scream. We still, to this day, laugh about this and her crap excuse for screaming in the guy's face as he opened the door. We told her parents the story later that day and they couldn't stop laughing as it turns out it was Val's son and he'd come to visit while she was ill. A year ago, I'm 27. I've got my friends over playing a game called Rage Cage. For the stid, it's like any other drinking game. Some skill involved, but the point is to make people drink. I happen to be pretty good at it, and it's usually my party, so I make a big deal about it, showboat, encourage my friends to gang up on me etc. Play the villain. It gets down to the last cup, which has a lot of hard alcohol in it as a punishment for being the last loser, and as the game goes, it's either me or another who will drink it. The entire table is so intent on having me drink it that they are all shouting at me or cheering for my opponent, and almost a miracle, my ball slips out of my hand, bouncing slowly towards the penalty cup in the center of the table. Our rules dictate that if that ball makes it in the wrong cup, you drink it, but it's going so slow that I'd be able to lazily reach out to grab it on its like fourth bounce or so along the table. As I reach out to stop it, the entire table erupts in a flurry of motion as like 8 bodies, almost everyone surrounding the table, leaps onto the table in unison to grab my hand or otherwise tackle me to stop me from interfering with the bouncing ball, which, by another miracle, makes it in the penalty cup somehow undisturbed by all the bodies landing on the table. It's an uproar. Everyone is just in a tangled mess on the table knocking over everything besides the penalty cup, or otherwise are busy tackling me to the floor. They're trying to get entangled all at the same time, and are pushing off each other, somehow making it worse, and people like me are starting to inexplicably get swept under the table as the floor gets slicked with spilling beer. Sure, I lost, but man, I haven't laughed that hard or so long in my life. Maybe the only time I've ever legitimately been rolling on the floor laughing my ass off. I feel like this is going to be a lot of build up to a climax that's only funny to the people directly involved, but here goes. Buckle up, because it's going to be a bit of a ride. The most relevant characters are myself, B, and C. The three of us know each other well, and B and C are ostensibly friends. However, with both C and I have had to deal with some beef with B. Let me set the scene. We're all college students, or non-parents involved in the story are either 19 or 20. I had just ended the most toxic roommate/friendship with B before beach. Honestly, seriously, she had a tendency to cyclically go around and talk shit about all her friends to each other. Case in point, she went behind my back and talked shit about me to my best friend. I'm realizing at this point that this sounds like some real 7th grade drama, but the story still stands. I delicately and respectfully told B that rooming together was really harmful to our friendship, and she made a point to start some crocodile tears before responding verbally. I recognized that I hurt her feelings at that point, but I was done with walking on eggshells around her. Every previous time I tried to talk to her about things she did that bothered me, she'd shut me down. I put up with it for a while, but the straws piled up on this camel's back, and I decided I was over it. Anyways, I knew that the tension in the room was going to be off the charts, so I crashed at C's house. C has 2 houses, one where her parents live, house 1, and one she rents with some friends, house 2. I was staying with C at house 2, but she needed to grab some stuff from house 1. I tagged along because her parents are really nice and she has many wonderful dogs, and we made an afternoon out of it. At some point, C went and had a conversation with her parents. In doing this, she discovered that B had called C's dad to ask if she could borrow, like, a blender or something. Again, B and C are supposedly still friends, so it was really awkward and kind of shady that B didn't just ask C directly. As a result of this, B had no idea that either of us were there. C and I were displeased. By this point, we decided we had to do our best to make B's entry into the house as awkward as humanly possible. Hide my car so she doesn't know I'm here. Hang up a banner that says, "You faked up." Try and there's no time. She's here. C sprints to the couch and assumes a casual position. I veer towards the piano, and as I hear footsteps approach the door, I begin to play the piece that's already up on the music stand. It's fairly dark in the room, and I struggle to see the notes on the page, but I manage to sight read it with just a few mistakes. I don't read the title. C answers the door, says an enthusiastic "Hey, I didn't know you were coming," and gives a blender. I continue to play the piano. B drives away. I look back up at the sheet music. As I read the title, my eyes fill with tears and I hold back a gut-busting guffaw. Right here waiting TLDR. Girl shows up unannounced at a friend's house, and a pianist plays Right Here Waiting to serenade the entrance also. I feel like I don't properly clarify the relationship between B and myself, and I don't clarify what sort of person B is. I don't really want to go into depth about how she's treated me, but I'd describe her as someone who isn't evil, just really shitty and self-centered. Of all the people who have spent any amount of time and any level of proximity to her, I lasted the longest, because I kept on giving her the benefit of the doubt because we were, like, camp friends. I generally expect camp friends to be pretty ride or die loyal. So I took acid recently with my sister and my girlfriend. I've already taken shrooms a handful of times with my girlfriend and discovered the uncontrollable laughing to the point of tears about literally nothing important enough to remember LMAO. But let me just say acid with my sister was a whole nother level of hilarious. She would be so faking confused on what me and my girl would talk about and be like, "Wait, I know what you mean. Like really, I really understand." And I could feel that she really truly understood. It was so awesome how much our minds link together whenever we are on acid together. Anyways, a trip or two ago, whenever my sister would get up from the bed to go do something like pee or get food, she not only looked, but acted so goddamn fat, like she totally isn't fat at all, but she was wearing loose comfortable clothing, big t-shirt and basketball shorts. And for some reason whenever her clothing would move when she walked, my mind would fill in her clothes with fat, cause I'm tripping, when it really was just the air in her clothing. Does that make sense? LMAO, that was hilarious enough, and me and my girl were wiping away tears by the time my sister got down from my bed. /// Keep in mind I live in a trailer, so my bed is at one end and you can see directly straight down to the other end, and my toilet is open not enclosed. Since, again, I live in a trailer, so for privacy we have this big 5 feet by 4 foot board to act like a door to block my area from the living room area because I have annoying dogs, and to hide behind when my sister comes over for privacy. Anyways, my sister usually moves the board out of the way by leaning it up against my sink to get a clear walkway to get out of my room and bathroom area to get to the other end of the trailer where my dogs and living room are. Tell me why she grabbed my damn door/board and flung it into the living room. Me and my girl were faking shook. This board is pretty heavy, probably like 20 pounds, but my bigger Hulk sister in that moment decided it was in her way, and that was indeed the only thing she could've done. I don't know. Acid made us laugh in a way that I never have before. My head is throbbing just thinking about it, lol. My dad's house used to share a yard with a neighbor at the end of the block, so there was his house, a really long yard, and then the other house. When we would play wiffle ball, we would hit the ball toward the other house and away from the street, because it was impossible to hit a wiffle ball that wasn't taped all the way to the other house. Plus it's a wiffle ball, so it couldn't hurt anything anyway. One day we are playing with in the yard and the girls from the house across the yard are on their swing set that was in the middle of the two houses. Sure enough, my uncle throws me a pitch and I take the best swing of my entire life up to that point, and the ball rockets straight up in the air and it feels like it sails for 10 seconds. As the one girl, probably about 10 years old so not super young, is swinging forward, the plastic ball falls like a dart from the sky and hits her square in the face. She lets out a grunt/squeak like I'd never heard before and slows herself down by dragging her feet. As soon as she comes to a complete stop, she falls straight back off the swing like she just got shot with a cannon. The girl's mom screams "oh my god" and sprints from the house to pick her up. She scoops her up in her arms and rushes her into the house. Through the kitchen window we see them frantically applying ice to her face, like they are tending to a mortal wound. About 15 minutes later an ambulance shows up. The entire time this is going on, my dad, my uncle and I are watching with bewilderment at all the activity, from getting hit with a wiffle ball. Not long after that the ambulance leaves and the girls are back out in the yard. Without saying a word she picks the ball up and throws it back to us, then goes back to swinging. I was too stunned to laugh at the moment, but when I was telling my friends that the following Monday I laughed so hard I had to change my shirt. So one day my cousin asks me if I wanted to go to the mall with him because he wanted to buy some shoes. I tag along considering I had nothing to do, so we arrive and this guy from one of the kiosks comes up to us. I already knew they were trying to get us to buy something, so I walked in the other direction and my cousin kept going until the guy asked him if he ever tried an electric muscle stimulator or whatever. Cousin says no, that he's never heard of them, but that he wasn't really interested. My cousin was home free up until the guy mentions that it's great for people who work out. Quick background on my cousin: he's a smart guy, but has a really big ego and thinks he knows it all. My cousin thought the guy gave him a compliment by implying he looked like he worked out, so he suddenly became interested in the stimulator. I go and see what they are talking about, and the guy is telling my cousin that this is great for muscle recovery and can help you get bigger muscles faster. We try it out. My cousin, being the conceited guy that he is about halfway sold on the idea. The guy then tells us how the machine is worth $300, but he'll sell it for $125 since he sold many throughout the day and wants to hook us up. He then begins to add on all this other stuff for free and his manager comes running towards us looking angry because he was giving away all this stuff for free. She tells my cousin that he wasn't supposed to receive all of this stuff, but since it was already offered to him, that he could get it, but he had to buy it and couldn't return it. My cousin starts thinking about it and is about to say no, but then he asks if this machine can give him abs. The manager, a very fit lady, tells him that of course it can get him abs and tells him he doesn't have to work out in order to do so. Apparently that's how she got hers. So my cousin looks at her abs, she pulls his hand so he can feel them, and he immediately pulls out his wallet to close the deal. The whole time I'm dying inside because I know he just fell for a scheme. He pays and we walk away, but we don't go to the shoe store. We head right back to his car. He's quiet for about 20 minutes and he finally says, "Man, all I wanted was some shoes. Why the fact did I leave with this stupid electric muscle thingy? I better get some abs." And I completely lost it. I couldn't stop laughing and started crying the whole car ride home because of it. I called him stupid and he started laughing as well. It may not be funny reading it, but it was hilarious watching my know-it-all cousin get suckered into buying something he never ended up using. 7th grade. Ms. Manny's English class. Ms. Manny is a real witch. She plays favorites, especially girls, tells your grade to the entire class, makes snide comments about kids' intelligence, and then acts all nice and polite when another teacher or parent is around. I forget the exact details, but all you need to know is that she deserved what we did in her class. About 3 months into the year, me and the other boys and a couple girls who she had it out for had become resigned to the fact that she was going to be a beach no matter what we did, so we wouldn't take her seriously and would do shit like blow our noses excessively loudly. We thought it was well funny at the time. There's one kid in my class who is still to this day the funniest person I have ever met. I don't know exactly why or how, but he is one of those people that are just funny. Now it is May, and we have had to endure almost a full 9 months of her country, and for some reason she is telling a story about her old boyfriend when she was a teenager. She told the story of her and David going to a drive-in theater, and David, the absolute lad, made a move to kiss her, and she said no. At this moment, the aforementioned funniest person I've ever met yells in a mocking feminine voice, "No, David," and I, along with my whole class, faking lost it. Words can't even do it justice, because most of what was funny about it came from the delivery. I couldn't stop laughing for the entire class period, all the way down the hall, and into my Spanish class. I wasn't the only one who couldn't stop laughing either. I don't know if you've ever laughed this hard, but it got to the point where I could barely breathe, and my body felt weak because of all the energy I spent laughing. Teddy Wilson, if you're out there reading this, know that you gave me the highlight of my middle school years. I can tell you the hardest my dad laughed before he died. It was the last 6 months of his life, when the cancer had progressed to his brain, and he was slowly dying. My parents lived 2 hours away from me, so I would drive up to their house every weekend to see him. One Friday I was on the road with 2 hours to just think about things. Of course this was a bittersweet time, because during this time I happened to be pregnant with my third child and she was born 3 months before my dad died. So this particular day, my little newborn was in the car with me safely tucked into her car seat. As I drove along I had a stark realization about my childhood and my relationship with my dad. I feel very fortunate to have had this time, to really be with him, even though he was no longer able to speak, because of the impact of the cancer on his brain. My dad always had a great voice, very deep and conveyed instant authority. So when he lost his ability to speak it was soul crushing for all of us to see this brilliant man no longer able to have a conversation. So this day, as I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, I had something really important to tell my dad. I walked in the door and made a beeline for his room, where a hospital bed had been set up for him. We had a hospice aide there to help my mom care for him. She is the hero of the story, by the way. She really set the bar high for all of us when it comes to in sickness and in health. So, when I walked into the room my dad was sort of dozing off, but opened his eyes as soon as heard my footsteps, because he knew he was going to have a baby to snuggle. So, I looked right at him and said with all seriousness, Daddy, when I was a kid, I always thought you were the bad guy. Except I didn't say bad guy, I said asshole, because we are a family who uses the right word for the occasion. I went on to say, but now I realize that I was the asshole. So I'm sorry. He sat straight up in bed and laughed the biggest loudest belly laugh he could. It was one of the greatest moments of my life. He died 3 days later. TLDR, impersonating the South Park, we laughed for 20 minutes straight. About 4 years ago, one of my friends, went down to the beach, but somehow got booked instead of merely a ticket for smoking cigarettes on the beach, and just got released, but his phone died, and only memorized my number, which since I owned a consulting company before, I have an easy phone number similar to 818 111 to 1231. The real numbers are different, but the repeating and sequence is the same. But long story short, my roommate M was the only one with a working car, so I asked him to help pick it up. Not to mention, since it was a Friday afternoon, we thought we might as well hang out too. We were trying to cheer A up, including M who started blasting and A was happily singing along to the chorus. Then A's brother went to the ATM, since lots of restaurants in the area were cash only, so I started to do that thing, where you drive off a few feet every time you are about to reach the door handle. M was a bit fatigued, since we were in traffic for almost 2 hours, so he asked me to drive. Then M started to say you don't like it? Rubs nipples, then that's too bad. We all started to add to it, and by the time we reached the restaurant we were all too far gone laughing. We were seated at a table and none of us can even order for the next 5 minutes, with 4 grown-ass men rubbing their nipples in unison, trying to speak and cracking up, and then just as we were winding down, the server was almost ready to kick us out, and said we were making other people uncomfortable, and we were desperately trying to contain ourselves when a random patron, J, the next table over, came to defend us, points at A's distinctive, and says, can't you see that he just got out of jail? If you don't like it, starts joining us, then I'm sorry. Yeah, that's such a pity. We just faking lost it completely, and high-fiving him took some effort, since I was laughing too hard. At this point it felt like we were laughing for 20 whole minutes, and Jay wound up buying our drinks too. Just a few weeks ago in my debate class, we were doing a mock debate, real books vs ebooks. Now I was real books all the way, and so was the rest of the class, except one girl who I was sitting next to who was the only one saying ebooks were better. Now I also happened to kind of been leading the argument against ebooks, and also happened to be sitting next to the only person who was for ebooks, so things got out of hand real quick. We kept screaming arguments at each other, and at one point I pulled out an old copy of Abolition of Man I had in my book bag from a previous class, and I just stuck it in her face, and screamed smell it. Book smell was one of my leading arguments, so we got onto old people, and reading and how you can zoom and ebook, you need a magnifying glass for books, etc. and we just are kind of laughing screaming at each other, while the class watches. Then she, out of nowhere, just screams grandmas can't read. We both froze, and stared at each other for a second, before breaking into the hardest laughter ever. We were laughing for a solid 5 minutes straight and our class tried to move on, but we just kept laughing, and the teacher couldn't talk over us. We eventually calmed down and now me and her are pretty okay friends. Grandmas can't read is sort of a recurring joke between us now. When it happened though I couldn't breathe. I legit thought I was gonna pass out or something, and it was only me and her laughing too. The rest of the class had kind of just been watching in horror most of the time, watching us scream laugh arguments at each other until that point, and when we broke down they just stared on. So I went to this program in university for getting a degree alongside high school. This was the first year, and I wasn't really good friends with my classmates yet. What I did have was a romantic interest. Now we hadn't dated yet, but we were talking, and it seemed pretty clear to me at the time that I liked her. Me, being a dumb teen, was obviously willing to do many things to keep her interest. One day we had a break. She had a cup of hot tea. There was this one girl that she didn't really like. Let's name her Anne. Now I wasn't that big a fan of Anne as well, so what happened next wasn't too surprising. She handed me the cup, and for no obvious reason other than kicks she decided that I should pour it on her. So I did. This wasn't my greatest moment, but as soon as I did, it started flowing down the middle of her face and throat, and inside her shirt. The tea then proceeded to flow straight down her entire body, until reaching her legs, flowing straight to her shoes. It was a big cup. At that moment I just started laughing, and laughing so hard as she stood facing me, not comprehending what had just occurred. Then my romantic interest also started laughing, and we spiraled into tears. A year later me and Anne went on to become best friends, and as we were walking around uni she grabbed the bottle of Coke I was holding, and poured the entire thing on my head. She then said a single word, tea, and man, that was a good laugh for both of us. I was 17, on acid with 3 or 4 friends. We were kind of at the jiggly stage right before peaking, right when things start to really ramp up. We were talking about evolution or something, and someone pondered how we could ever be sure we are descended from some proto-apes, because we'll never truly see it occur. I said, if you ever have any doubt if we are related to chimps, just listen to a group of people laughing. So we started laughing, which sounds very, very much like a group of excited apes once you hear it. That made us laugh more intensely, which only made us sound more like a group of apes. This became an uncontrollable hilarious feedback loop of ever more raucous laughter. And if a person doesn't sound like an ape when they are laughing a little, they sure do. When they are laughing so hard they're roaring, their ribs start hurting, and they can't catch their breath. All the while, we were all simultaneously realizing this absurd primal sound was coming from us, and it's something we've done all our lives. We could at the same time hear a group of chimpanzees, and recognize that we were involuntarily making this sound, because it's just what humans sound like. This went on for probably 15 minutes, which felt like hours. Pure, apish glee with a little tribe. We had occasional aftershocks of laughing fits like that 4 years afterwards. To this day the moment will strike me and all of a sudden I'm laughing harder than everyone in the group for no apparent reason. Then when I explain what I'm laughing at, it spreads to the group. That joke has been spontaneously erupting for more than 20 years now. Hope you enjoy it. When the movie Sausage Party was just about to go out of local theaters, I took my soon-to-be brother-in-law, his sister, and myself to one of those super cheap venues that show movies that are just about to go to DVD release and only charge a couple of bucks to get in to watch it on the big screen. He was 15, and I had felt bad that his parents wouldn't allow him to go see Deadpool when it was released, since it was rated R, even though he had seen every Marvel movie the day it had come out, since he was 10. Massive Marvel fan. Needless to say, he was down in the dumps for more than a couple of months. So along I come with my need to be loved by everyone on her side of the family, and I proceed to hatch a plan to go see a raunchy comedy without his parents knowing. I figured a seeing sausage party would hopefully bring his spirits up and maybe earn me some brownie points for the future. I'm getting married to his sister in a week. Success. The first mistake I made was to not check the reasons that sausage party was rated R, and the second was to think it would be a good idea to take my Christian-raised, ultra-quiet, and shy girlfriend's brother to see a raunchy comedy of which I had not read a single review. After convincing him to go out to dinner with us beforehand, we stopped by the theater, and while initially hesitant to go, he eventually caved and went in with us. Most of the movie went alright. There were more than a couple of moments where something sexual would happen in the movie and we would all three make a conscious effort to pretend like we didn't hear what the actors on screen just to avoid any awkwardness. Spoiler alert for Sausage Party. If you haven't seen Sausage Party, towards the end of the movie it looks to be a happy ending, but the genius writers Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill gave us a wonderful surprise. We were all floored when a literal massive food orgy ensued, and none of us dared to look at one another again, for the sake of avoiding awkwardness. This lasted for about a minute, but the orgy had no signs of slowing down, and was actually getting worse. At this point there was so much awkward tension between the three of us that I had started to break down mentally. I began to think about the situation and how hilarious it was that it would happen to us three, and the cracking of suppressed laughs and tears started. The main problem for the next minute was that the food orgy scene was still going on, and after that point I had completely lost all of my shit and started to open mouth laugh, but no sound was coming out because of the spasms going through my body, all at the thought of telling this story to her parents when her brother was over 17. Now I had started to slide down in the well-cushioned chair of the theater towards the floor, until eventually my butt was met by cold cement. The scene had recently just ended, and I was down on the ground trying to catch my breath, and noticed that I had been laughing so hard that both brother and sister were giggling uncontrollably as well, the first time all night. All in all, a good time was had by everyone. However, my intercostal muscles were sore the next couple of days. TLDR took shy girlfriend's brother to see a raunchy comedy, Sausage Party, was surprised by a food orgy, and laughed so hard it broke the barrier of awkwardness. Okay, so this is a long one. Never told it on the internet. So back in 2012 I used to get a lift to work with my mother. She worked in the hospital, so I used to get a lift to the hospital and jump on the bus into the town center. So this one, normal as day, getting a lift in with mum, said my goodbyes, and walked into the hospital waiting room for about 7:42 am, where I used to chill out before the bus arrived at 8:04 am. So I'm waiting, headphones on, and I start drifting off asleep in the waiting room. I then drift back into real life and I start panicking as I glance at my phone and it's 8:03 am. I look outside and my bus just pulled up. So I let out a panic noise, put my headphones around my neck, grabbed my bus money out, and jolted for the hospital in trance. The entrance to the hospital was a revolving door and I ran straight into the glass half asleep and dropped my bus money in the area to which the door was revolving. Stupid as bends over to start grabbing my sorry as bus change, not aware that the other side of the revolving door was coming for my sorry as. I paused. Smack. Next thing I'm on the floor head first. The bloody door smacked me in the hoop while I was bent over, vulnerable AF, and proceeded to push me round clockwise on my actual face. I was getting carpet burns on my face, and I was helpless. My hood went over my head, so I couldn't see a thing. My bag tangled my arms, so I couldn't adjust. For a quarter of a revolving door spin, I was helpless. After about 5 seconds of this menacing journey, I somehow performed some sort of barrel roll out of the other side into the front of hospital. I was presented with a woman on the phone at the time, absolutely pissing herself with laughter, and come over and hugged me to see if I was okay. I had a combination of laughter and crying and sheer humiliation. It then came to my attention that my bus is still there over the road and there is about 60p worth of change still in the area of embarrassment behind me. I then walked back round, picked up my change, and walked to the bus, and got on with my day. With it being a hospital, this footage has to be somewhere. Everyone I have ever told says that this is the funniest story, and every time I think, I just laugh now. Whenever there is a serious moment or a negative time in my life, I think back to when I got owned by a revolving door. Last year, I went up to the GC in Australia for university games playing water polo. As you could imagine, it's just a massive piss up over a whole week. This bloke, Brandon, not real name, was already getting loose by the Sunday we got up there, having spent $600 on a bag of coke. We were already wondering whether he was the secret love child of Keith Richards and Ozzy Osbourne. The days were going by, and we were witnessing many of his ridiculous antics that we thought wouldn't be topped. Until Wednesday night. We were walking to the boulevard and past a public fountain when our group leader told us to stop. Confused, I looked around till my eyes set on Brandon's naked body. I glanced between him and the fountain, and in shock, knew what was going to happen. He jumped straight in, kicking his legs wildly to make his butt cheeks wiggle violently, and then turned around yelling "Get around him," while helicoptering his willy. I watched some of the snap videos later that night, saving some screenshots of his bare ass, rolling in laughter, in which I declared that I faking loved this bloke. Fast forward a couple of months later, and Brandon is giving a speech at my 21st that had me and my mum in stitches about being a shy guy before he met me. That was a lie, haha. And then he surprisingly mentioned in front of everyone that apparently I inspired him to jump into the fountain. I doubled down in laughter, unable to contain myself, because I'm pretty sure he just did it on his own free will. Hilarious stuff. This is super late, but yesterday the stockroom at my work flooded. Apparently the store above us had some plumbing issues overnight, and their entire store flooded, and then water started coming down into our store violently. It was bad. Water seeping through the walls, pouring out of the ceiling, running out of the light fixtures and vents. But I and my merchandising team walked into this at 5 AM. So, obviously, I put in 2 work orders, one to address the goddamn hurricane in my back room, because I didn't know where it was coming from, and then a second one for cleanup, because I was not about to mop that shit up. I explicitly state what I just stated above. It is bad. Lots water everywhere. So 4 hours later, water is still pouring out of my ceiling, so you can imagine how much worse it is now. The guy that facilities sent out arrives. Who did they send? An ancient guy from the islands with a mop and a bucket. This is comedic already, based on what we know about the natural toilet disaster that is occurring. However, when he walks into the 2-inch high water that is covering approximately 900 square feet and steadily taking over more space, he bends over, puts his hands on his lower back, and squeaks out "Amiga, amiga." I, being overworked and functioning on 4 hours of sleep for 4 days, and on my third 5 AM to 5 PM in a row, faking die. That wasn't the funniest part though. The funniest part was a couple of hours later, when I asked one of my merchandisers to do somewhat of a big task, and she responds by bending over, putting her hands on her lower back and saying "Omg." I was in tears on the floor. A few years ago I was with my boyfriend and our small Jack Russell Poppy at the dog park. We were walking around the park like usual, and when we got about halfway around we ran into a lady with a really small black dog. We'll call him Fluffers. We always end up chatting with people here, because Poppy is super friendly and loves sniffing all the other dogs. So we started chatting with the woman and she started telling us how it's her first time bringing Fluffers to the park, and she was really nervous about how he would go with the other dogs. Poppy had started to sniff Fluffers at this point, and you could tell that he was really hesitant to let her get too close. Suddenly, Fluffers starts yelping at Poppy and pulls away. Poppy, being super friendly and all, tries to get closer like "Hello friend, don't be scared, let me sniff," but Fluffers isn't having it. He starts to pull back from her even more, until he's running away, sideways. I tried to call Poppy back to me, so she didn't scare him too much, but before I could grab her they've both taken off with Fluffers yelping extremely loudly in fear. Then, I swear to faking jealous, every single dog in that dog park turns and looks at them both and starts running after Fluffers in a full sprint. So my boyfriend, this poor woman and I are standing there dumbfounded watching this tiny black screaming dog being chased by a mob of at least 10 other dogs, none of us knowing what the hell to do. At this point Poppy is still at the front of the pack and my boyfriend and I are in tears with laughter. Finally, the dogs made it back around to where we were and the woman says, "Oh dear, I knew I shouldn't have brought him," puts Fluffers back on the lead and takes him home. I was out celebrating my graduation from university a few years ago with a few friends from my work. I bumped into one of my friends that I used to go to school with, and he joined us for a few drinks towards the end of the night. We ended going back to my work friend's house to continue the celebration, so my school friend joins us. We're all sitting in the living room chatting about an incident that happened in one of the apartments across the road earlier that week. Basically there was a bomb threat and the bomb squad had to come out and assess the situation to make sure it was a hoax and stuff. So the friend from work says, yeah, they figured out it was a hoax and they just left earlier today. To which my school friend replies, well, they're going to need to come back. Everyone looks at each other confused. Then after a few seconds of silence he enthusiastically shouts, "'Cause we've got a such bomb sitting over here," whilst pointing at me with a big grin on his face. I was absolutely floored. Couldn't breathe from laughing and this went on for about 10 over 15 minutes with this room full of people just scowling at us. We got asked to leave promptly after that. Was totally worth it though. Okay, I don't know if this was hardest in my life, but this was the hardest I laughed in recent history. In July of this year, my cousin I'll call Molly's birthday was coming up, so her sister, both of these women are in their late 30s/early 40s, got a hotel room in town for a group of our female cousins. There were 7 of us total. So we are in the hotel room after getting dinner, playing a game and drinking mocktails. Molly doesn't drink, so there was no alcohol involved this night, when Molly's sister, the oldest of the group, and thus a sort of mother figure to all of us, asked me about a medical issue I had a couple years ago. I'd been in the hospital for a week, because I had had recurrent back pain for years, which culminated in a nasty pulmonary infection that left me with 800 milliliters of fluid on each lung, plus some around my heart. The whole thing was really crazy, and while my family obviously knew about it, and most of them had visited me in the hospital, I had never really explained everything the doctors found out to them all, which wasn't much. A lot of the issue remains a mystery. So anyway, Molly's sister was asking me what caused it, etc. I explained that we don't know what caused it, or why the infection suddenly got so much worse, but then I recounted something funny that had happened in the hospital. The week before I was admitted to the hospital, I had been on vacation in Arizona. While there, myself, my mom, and my best friend went on a tour into an old silver mine. Down in the mine, the guide was explaining about this one type of rock that looks exactly like turquoise, and the only way to tell that it isn't real turquoise is to lick it, because it will feel tacky, whereas turquoise will feel smooth. He then asked for a volunteer to lick the rock, so I volunteered and licked the rock. The doctors asked me if I had been in any caves recently, so I told them that story, and they got a good laugh out of it, though they didn't think it was related to my issue. So I digress. I was telling that story to my cousins, and when I got to the part about, so there's this rock that looks like turquoise and the only way to tell it isn't. My cousin I'll call Becca, who I'm closer in age to, and who I'm pretty close with, cut me off and said, let me guess, you licked it. And I replied, actually yes. And oh my god, read it. The look on her face. She had no idea that's what I was about to say, and just happened to blurt that out as the weirdest thing she could think of that I could do to the rock. The look on her face, followed by the subsequent what, was one of the funniest things I had ever seen. She and I both started laughing so hard we were crying. Then another cousin, who is an archaeologist and has an anthropology degree, jumped in explaining that the whole licking rocks thing isn't that weird, and that she's had to do that with rocks and bones in the field. It doesn't sound like that funny of a story, but oh my god, I was dying. Just thinking about this makes me happy. Lol, I had 2 friends, Donnie and Roman, with absolutely no food knowledge trying to make lean so they could imitate their favorite mumble rappers. This is cool, dude. Migas drinks this stuff. They got some codeine syrup, 2 bottles of Sprite, Jolly Ranchers and purple Kool-Aid mix. They each took a Sprite, poured their codeine in, and then started adding candy and Kool-Aid to color and flavor it more. Now if you don't know, Kool-Aid powder reacts with carbonated drinks much like the old Mentos and Coke reaction. Roman might have known this and was adding his Kool-Aid very slowly using a 1/4 teaspoon so nothing exploded, but he was spilling powder everywhere. Donnie on the other hand, grabbed a paper funnel and popped it in the top of his Sprite, and as he poured a sheet load of Kool-Aid mix down the funnel, announced to the whole room, "Roman's retarded, this is the way to do." Before he could finish his declaration of being the smartest guy ever, his Sprite bottle erupted in a purple foaming fountain, blasting the now grape flavored Sprite and about $200 worth of codeine all over himself and the kitchen. I laughed so hard I completely fell over, slamming into the floor with tears in my eyes, while Donnie's face contorted into horror and rage at the sight of his newly purpled kitchen. He scrambled to soak up anything he could in a clean rag and tried to wring it out into his mouth, desperate to salvage at least some of the drugs. With every frustrated scream he made, I laughed harder and harder. The image of his soda volcano burned into my mind like a 1-second gif. It was my friend's birthday. We had went the whole 9. Surprised her with cake and sushi and a shuttle to drive our drunk ass around all night. We were all a shit show on a regular basis, so this night was going to be epic regardless. Now, I should mention that my friend at the time was a tan blingy bottle blonde that isn't that common in the great state of Iowa. So we are leaving our 15th bar of the evening, or something, and all of us had gotten in the shuttle except birthday girl. We are all laughing and talking, and generally having a great time waiting for her. And in slow motion the greatest thing I've ever seen in real life happens. We saved her shotgun, and all she had to do was step off the curb and open the door after she came out of the bar. We watched her come out, only she was talking to someone as she was leaving, and didn't realize there was a curb, and face planted in the most movie scene way I've ever seen. She literally just dropped, like only a drunk person could do. We all look at each other and start dying laughing. Then we couldn't decide if we should open the door because we were scared we'd hit her head. 30 seconds or so pass with us all in hysterics when she climbs in the shuttle and says no one told me about the faking curb. Which caused even the sober shuttle driver to lose it. Even just typing this, I'm cracking up because it was the truly funniest thing I've ever seen. Yes, she was fine. She had some scrapes on her knees and a few bruises. She remembered zero of it, so it was just as funny telling her the next day what happened. Extremely late to the party, but here goes. Myself and 3 friends were playing Minecraft, Tech It mod pack, and the center of this mod revolves around the introduction of dark and red matter, extremely time consuming and mind-numbingly boring to get, which can be used to make tools, weapons, and armor, the latter of which are the strongest in the game. We start off slow, going through mines, killing mobs and grabbing whatever resources we can until eventually after 2 hours of grinding we manage to get the Philosopher's Stone. This can be used to convert EMC, item points basically, into other items of certain value. We realize we can make red matter with coal, and so we spend 4 more hours slaving away to get enough coal and EMC to make even more coal, so on and so forth. At the beginning there were 4 of us that started playing at around 10 PM. Now there was only 2 of us, and somehow we managed to play until 6 AM, and after all this time we managed to get our hands on the elusive red matter pickaxe, of which we wanted the whole night for its supposed insane power. We make it, and are cheering with joy after all this time. My friend bestows upon me the red matter pickaxe, and gives me the honor of striking the first block with it. I gloss over the tool, and get ready to strike. I press my finger onto the left mouse button and I start mining. It's the same speed as an iron pickaxe, but the catch is it doesn't break. About 2 seconds of silence roll around after the first block, and then I see my friend leave, and I start crying with laughter. At first I couldn't tell if I was going insane or genuinely found it funny. We both broke out laughing for about 25 minutes straight, and I was struggling to breathe whilst crying. We settled down until I said we couldn't go to space or make nukes, as promised. The sickest thing we could do was make a pickaxe, then all hell broke loose, and we started laughing again for a solid 20 minutes onward. Kind of one of those had to be there to find it hilarious type things, but I feel like people who have grinded in games to get something and have it be extremely lackluster can at least get a giggle. TLDR, stayed up for 8 hours on a Minecraft mod pack with promises of great things and new stuff, then realized all we could do was make an unbreaking pickaxe after all our time of playing. Wasn't disappointed, just found it extremely funny.